So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, you know, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, you know, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com. Well, great news today. Free Speech TV and a bunch of donors, actually, I'm going to go through the list here in just a moment, got together, and this group of donors are all offering matching gifts. And in aggregate, it adds up to $12,000. So your donation today, up to $12,000, will be matched and therefore doubled. So you give $10 to Free Speech, it becomes $20. You give $50 to Free Speech, it becomes $100. Excuse me, you give $200 to Free Speech TV, it becomes $400. You give $1,000, it becomes $2,000 to Free Speech, whatever it may be. So with many thanks, so please call now. 877-378-8669 is the telephone number. And thanks to Anonymous in Sacramento, Helen in Spokane, Ed and June in Albany, New York, Marija in Los Angeles, Helene in Fallbrook, California, Les and Nancy in Mimbres, New Mexico. My apologies if I'm mispronouncing names or cities. I probably am, but Roberta in Sun Lakes, Arizona, Kathy and Ken in Bellingham, Washington, Bob and Carol in Bandon, Oregon, Debbie in Prior Lake, Minnesota, Jim in Fenton, Michigan, Kim in Mount Vernon, Washington, John and Barbara in Newburgh, Oregon, and Carol in Eagan, Michigan. Thank you to each one of you. These matching grants are actually a big deal. When people who can afford offer a matching grant like this, it really encourages everybody else, which is you, to make a contribution right now and have that doubled. So please call 877-378-8669, 877-378-8669 right now, and make your gift to Free Speech TV. It is really an important time. I mean, this is a time when the media is really failing at their job. They're not informing people. They're letting all these right-wing talking points, rise to the top and proliferate. The election in the Carolinas right now, I don't recall if it's north or south, but that Bishop McCready election that's happening at this moment today is a great example. I mean, that election is happening because the previous Republican candidate had hired a guy who went around and collected absentee ballots from people, and if they voted for Democrats, destroyed them. And I mean, it even went beyond that, but it was, I mean, just pure and simple election fraud by Republicans. And I say Republicans plural because this guy's been doing this for other Republican candidates for years. And meanwhile, the Republicans are running around the country trying to make it harder and harder and harder for people to vote. Ohio is purging 200,000 people from the rolls. There's a black woman in Texas who's sitting in prison right now because she registered to vote when she was a felon. And, Greg Abbott and buddies decided to make an example of her. I mean, the Republicans really don't want you to vote. And the media doesn't really want to talk about this. Here on Free Speech TV, you get the whole story. And that's a pretty big deal. It's really worth supporting. 877-378-8669. With a $20 gift, you get the Thom Hartmann 2020 bumper sticker. With a $50 gift, you get the Change the Channel Free Speech TV tote bag. With a $100 gift, there's any functional adult long sleeve shirt in sizes small through triple or double X large. With a $150 gift, my new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, will be out in a few weeks, and you'll get an autographed copy for $150. With a $250 gift, we're going to do a virtual meet and greet online. And with a $1,000 gift, come to Portland and hang out with us. Actually, there's some people coming this Friday, and we're going to have a real nice time.
It's going to be I think this month it's a relatively small group. I think we're going to have 4 or 5, 6 people, something like that here, and hang out and watch the last hour of the show, and then go grab lunch with us. And it's sweet. I learn things. Hopefully, people who show up learn things, find it of value, find it interesting, things like that. So anyhow, that's the bottom line. Is Free Speech TV needs your help. Maybe I was a little too enthusiastic yesterday about how cool everything is, that our show has been growing, Free Speech TV is growing, all this stuff is coming together, and because the donations were down yesterday. We need to make that back up. So please call today, 877-378-8669, and whatever you contribute will be doubled, which is just a big deal. I mean, with the help of all these wonderful people who made matching grants, who explicitly, intentionally made matching grants, contacted Free Speech TV and said, I'd like to encourage other people to give, and so I'll match their gifts up to $12,000. This is really cool. This is really substantial. So there's never a better time than now. Well, it's always a good time, I suppose, to contribute to Free Speech TV. You can do it 365 days a year. You can do one-time gifts. You can do sustaining gifts. However you do it, it helps keep this network alive, and that's a really important thing. Keeping Free Speech TV on the air, as with all progressive media, we are all facing challenges, and substantial challenges in many cases. Algorithms from big media companies and search engines and things like that don't particularly favor progressive points of view. The corporatization of the media, so that the media doesn't talk about, in any depth the actual issues that are being pursued.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, ding dong, the witch is gone. Is that sexist to use that? I think maybe it is. Anyway, John Bolton has just resigned or been kicked out. John Bolton, the guy who wants war with every place, he didn't choose to serve in Vietnam. It's particular, this whole thing, this whole chicken hawk phenomena is absolutely fascinating. The Bush campaign is now selling camouflage clothing, right? On the website, in order to raise money for the Trump re-election campaign. And probably some grift that involves the Trump crime family. You can buy this camo stuff, and Don Jr. is modeling it, and everybody's freaking out because there's a stain on one of the shirts. But really, I find it so weird that Corporal Bone Spurs, the guy who got 5 deferments from Vietnam, Donald Trump, is selling camouflage gear. But I think there's a larger issue. And John Bolton is also one of those war hawks, chicken hawks. When there was a war and he had an opportunity to serve, no thanks. But when he gets in power and he can send other people's children to a war, he's just gung-ho enthusiastic for that. So good riddance. This is actually good news for America and for the world that John Bolton is no longer in a position of power in this administration. Now, he'll probably end up on Fox News, agitating for war all the time, which we're going to talk about in some more detail a little later on in the program today. But the question that I find fascinating and that I would like to just ask right off and get right up there is, if Donald Trump gets reelected and the Republicans continue to control the Senate, in other words, if the status quo remains, or even if they took the House, or even if they don't have the Senate, but we just have Trump in the White House, what could be the worst outcome? What do you think could be the worst outcome? Would it be a further transfer of wealth from the middle class to the very rich? Would it be greater and greater student debt burdens on working people? Would it be the acceleration or the destruction of our environment? I mean, these are all things that I think are fairly predictable that would happen if Republicans continue to control our government, and if they continue to control the majority of our states, by the way, and Trump takes the White House. Will he launch a final assault on the news media? I mean, he's yesterday or the day before, he was basically tweeting at
a right-wing billionaire who owns I think it's $3.6 billion worth of, well, I'm doing this off the top of my head. I shouldn't do that. But anyway, this right-wing billionaire controls a large chunk of AT&T stock. AT&T controls CNN. So, Trump is saying, yeah, CNN is bad. Let's turn them into Fox News. Are we going to see all of our media turn into Fox News? I mean, it slowly seems to be happening. Stories just are not, frankly, being reported in context. Will McConnell's judges with lifetime appointments kneecap enforcement against white-collar crime? We already saw this, with the so-called criminal justice reform. It didn't actually have anything to do with the vast majority of people in prison. It affected, a couple thousand people with marijuana convictions in federal prisons. Well, I'm not even sure mostly it was white-collar crime. I mean, and it made it a lot harder to go after corporate CEOs. That was the criminal justice reform. But, what are these corrupt judges going to be doing? How much damage will be done by the Trump war on science and the Republican war on science? Whether it's getting in bed with evangelicals and saying that there's no such thing as evolution, or whether it's getting in bed with the fossil fuel industry and saying that there's no such thing as global climate change, or if it does, it's just a natural phenomenon. It doesn't matter how many billions of tons of carbon we've thrown into the atmosphere in the last 150 years. Will the religious fundamentalists, the Jerry Falwell Jr.'s and Franklin Grahams of the world, step up their campaign to burrow deeply into our political parties, particularly the Republican Party, and further subvert the separation of church and state? These guys have been proudly preaching politics from the pulpit, basically since President Obama was elected, in these white evangelical churches, and defying the IRS. You're supposed to lose your tax-exempt status if you do this. And they're like, I dare you. In fact, a bunch of them, there was a day back, this was when President Obama was in office, there was a day where they all did it on the same Sunday, intentionally. Like they signed an agreement, a pledge. Yes, we will talk politics in the pulpit. We dare you, Obama. And of course, the Obama administration didn't do anything about it, and the Trump administration obviously won't do anything about it. So how much worse could that get? Will the world be plunged into war with Iran or Venezuela? Trump right now, we have troops on the border of Venezuela. Trump is pushing Venezuela really hard. He's trying to topple Maduro. Oh my God, the guy's a socialist. His sanctions are causing real pain in both those countries. Bolton leaving, I suppose, gives us a little encouragement in that regard, but I'm not sure how much. Netanyahu this morning announced some new annexation of Palestinian territories in Israel. This is probably not going to go over well in Israel with the Palestinians, and is this going to further inflame the region? This is part of Netanyahu's. He's up for his election is next week, I believe, and so he's reaching out to the hard right in Israel, the same way that Trump is reaching out to the hard right here in the United States. So could we be looking at a war? Will the government, how Trump has got his own little police agency, his own little kind of SS in ICE, going out and seizing immigrants and throwing them in for-profit detention centers where, these big for-profit corporations, you and I, our tax dollars are paying them $750 a day to hold these undocumented immigrants. Is Trump going to turn that fire on progressives, on liberals? They're laying the ground for this right now across right-wing media, talking about the violence of Antifa. If you're opposed to fascism, you're violent. Is their shtick. And then they go out and try and provoke violence and then complain about it. So will they begin rounding up liberals? Are they going to be looking at your Facebook page to see who you support? How might Trump's privatized prisons and concentration camps be expanded? And who might he be trying to put them into
in order to generate more profit for his billionaire buddies and, hey, special bonus, get rid of his political opponents. How about the pesticides? You know, there's this pesticide that was supposed to be banned last year, or maybe it was early this year, because it's a potent neurotoxin. It damages children's nervous systems. And the Trump administration said, we don't care. You know, they got heavily lobbied by the pesticide industry. It's a very profitable pesticide, apparently, cheap to make, expensive to sell. And now it's being sprayed on millions of acres of our food. How much more toxic is our environment going to get? How many more bees are going to die? And all pollinators, for that matter. What about his deregulation of pollution? You know, rolling back the CAFE standards, the car emission standards, so that cars and diesel trucks can blow more soot and more exhaust and more poison and more carbon into the atmosphere. So that, you know, Americans, I think the number was $16 billion that it's estimated that Americans will spend if the increase in fuel standards does not go through. Americans, you know, in other words, if we go along with Trump's cutback on these fuel standards and these emission standards, you and I, well, actually, I drive a car that has a gasoline engine. It's a Prius electric plug-in, but the first 30 miles is all electric, and I don't think I've bought one tank of gas all year. Maybe one, maybe two. Louise and I drove up towards Seattle once and over to the seacoast once, and those are the only times we've used gasoline all year. But, you know, that most people are using gasoline, and you know, that is going to get more, you know, that expense will continue if we don't make cars more efficient. And not to mention the explosion of cancer and other diseases. You see all these ads on TV for things that deal with asthma and all these autoimmune disorders where the immune system is just going nuts. You know, there's a fair amount of evidence that this is like all tied into a toxic environment around us. How much worse will things get if the Republicans retain control? Will there be further tax cuts for the billionaires? Will wages on working people continue to decline? Will the war on unions be doubled down on? You know, virtually all the jobs that have been created since Donald Trump came into office have been either part-time jobs or jobs with no benefits and where people are working at will, basically, you know, gig kind of jobs. Very, very few, you know, good jobs with real benefits and you know, you can expect to work there for multiple years. Very few of those kind of jobs have been created now. How much worse is that going to get? What am I missing here?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
There's got to be a few other things we can add to this list. And, you know, what kind of dystopian future might we be facing if the Republicans seize power? And welcome back. Gary in Baden, Pennsylvania. Hey, Gary, what's up?
Good morning, Tom.
Hey, Gary, you sound much better today.
Thank you. Good morning. You're not missing anything, my friend.
What's that? Oh, in my list,
You're not missing anything. As we pick up, if I may, from yesterday's conversation, that you were talking about the corruption. Mm-hmm. That is right. I think you're still talking about it, actually.
Yeah.
And I think it's at the core. So I like to, this is my little view here. As we continue to go down this road of corruption with a presidency that has been devalued across the board, mm-hmm. with a gangster mentality, I just like to throw out a little bit of history. Mm-hmm. Somebody once said way back in 1976, being nominated for vice president of the United States, mm-hmm. here's what he said. He said, a president isn't elected to do as he pleases. He's elected to do what the people please, and then only as the law allows.
Right.
Period. So this is what we got. We got a guy in there that does what he pleases, and it's intolerable. We got to get to the polls. The reality is, I hope that he's impeached. That's his legacy. Get it on the books. It's his legacy. He'll never get away from it. And get out in the polls and just vote. Just do that. That's being active number one.
Yeah. And by the way, Gary, with regard to impeachment, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez this morning, Louise was telling me about it. She caught it on one of the news reports. I didn't see it myself directly, so this is secondhand information. But my understanding, I don't know if she tweeted it or if she said it in an interview. But apparently what she said this morning was the House should vote, if the House impeaches Trump and it goes to the Senate, everybody's, bringing their hands and saying, oh, Mitch McConnell will never, and the Republicans who are a majority in the Senate, they'll never vote to convict him. And it'll be like Bill Clinton. It'll just, he'll be vindicated, blah, blah, blah. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says, A, do the impeachment hearings anyway, because then, the entire country gets to learn about how deep his criminality and corruption are. And B, send it to the Senate. And when if the Republicans vote to not convict him and remove him from office, hang that around their necks like a millstone electorally, and make that part of your advertising campaigns when you're running for office. I mean, this is powerful stuff. And there's a fascinating study here that I'm going to get into a little later on in the program about how when Republicans are actually given news stories about how corrupt Donald Trump is, he loses support. The only reason that he's got so much support that's hanging on is because Fox News will not talk about these things, and right-wing talk radio won't talk about these things. And so the consequence of that is a lot of Republicans, good people who just, hey, Dad was a Republican, I'm a Republican. They're kind of unthinking Republicans. They're living in this media bubble, and they have really, literally no idea about how serious the crimes and corruption that this guy is engaged in are.
Right.
So,
in closing, the American people are very visual, and I think that is a visual thing. And in closing, greed has no heart ever.
There you go. Gary, thanks a lot. Good talking with you.
Thank you.
We'll be back. It's 21 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. Stick around. Welcome back. We're talking about how bad can it get, and beyond that, there's a fascinating study. Eric Bowler was writing about this over at Daily Kos, but it has been reported on in a number of places. This research organization got a bunch of people together and asked them, and assigned them up for basically a media diet. They were only going to get their news through this one media portal. This is I think it was over 1,000 people. And these folks agreed to participate in this study. And what they discovered was that when Republicans are given information, real information, about who Donald Trump is and what he's up to, this is a study that was analyzed by the Washington Post. It was 1,200 Americans who were involved in it. And this quoting from a piece by Matthew Chapman over at Raw Story. The study enrolled over 1,200 Americans in a news portal service that covered subjects like the Russian scandal and the Mueller investigation. Some of the 1,200 got more of it. Some of the 1,200 got less of it. In some cases, it kind of matched Fox's reporting, which is pretty much ignore all the bad news about Trump. And in other cases, they simply told the bad news about Trump. And this is what the authors of the study wrote, quote, "We found that only Republicans were significantly influenced by the scandal coverage or lack thereof." Now, the reason for that, in my opinion,
is because, why? In fact, they said Democrats had non-statistically significant reactions. Well, why would that be? Because Democrats are taking their news from a whole variety of sources, and they know how corrupt Trump is. They know how, about the Trump crime family. They know, about what a criminal this guy is. But, and then they go on to say, those who saw comparatively more Trump-Russia stories rated his job performance 7.5% lower than Republicans who did not read those stories, and rated their positive emotions toward Trump, like pride, enthusiasm, hope, 10.9% lower than those kept in the dark. In other words, they say, this is from the study, from the authors of the study. In other words, simply changing the balance of scandal headlines that they saw was enough to change Republicans' attitudes towards Trump. Now, I don't know if anything that makes a stronger case for progressive media than that. Meanwhile, over on the conservative side, and this is perhaps one of the things that I didn't, add to my list. Eric Bowler, writing for Daily Kos, he says, there's one way to try to halt public debate in this country: threaten mass violence and people's bloody revolt in the streets. And that's, it turns out, what the right-wing media is doing. Meghan McCain on The View said, if you take people's guns away from them, there's going to be a lot of violence. What you're calling for is civil war, warned Fox News' Tucker Carlson. What you were calling for is an incitement to violence. They're talking about Democrats getting elected and pursuing something like background checks or an assault weapon ban. Bullitt writes, it's an ominous and long-held belief among conservatives and conservative media outlets that citizens need to be fully armed in order to one day wage war on the American government as a kind of second American Civil War. This is what they think the Second Amendment was passed for. This, of course, has nothing to do with the Second Amendment. And then they point out the movement spiked with the election of President Barack Obama in 2009. Far-right Newsmax columnists determined that a, quote, military coup to resolve the, quote, Obama problem was not, quote, unrealistic. Following Sandy Hook, Eric Bowler writes, following the Sandy Hook school massacre, Fox's Todd Starnes warned that there would be, quote, a revolution, end quote, if the government tries to, quote, confiscate our guns. While Fox News' Pat Cadell claimed that the country was, quote, in a pre-revolutionary condition and on the verge of an explosion. This was after Obama was elected. Oh, my God, a black man in the White House? Now you've got Trump saying, hey, those Bahamian refugees? Marco Rubio, for goodness sakes, is tweeting out that Bahamians can come to the United States without a visa. They just can't have a criminal record. It's just that simple. And Trump now goes on TV and says, oh, yeah, there's some really bad people, just like those Mexicans. There's rapists and, well, actually, he says there's drug dealers and gang members, is what he's really saying is they're black people. It is getting grim. So what happens if this continues? What happens if the demonization of black people, Hispanics, Jews, and other minority groups in the United States that have been so much a part of what Trump is doing, what if that continues?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Not to mention the demonization of you and me, of progressives. How does that play out? We'll be back. Here. Well, great news today. Free Speech TV and a bunch of donors actually. I'm going to go through the list here in just a moment. Got together, and this group of donors are all offering matching gifts, and in aggregate, it adds up to $12,000. So your donation today, up to $12,000, will be matched, and therefore doubled. So you give $10 to Free Speech, it becomes $20. You give $50 to Free Speech, it becomes $100. Excuse me, you give $200 to Free Speech TV, it becomes $400. You give $1,000, it becomes $2,000 to Free Speech, whatever it may be. So with many thanks, so please call now. 877-378-8669 is the telephone number. And thanks to Anonymous in Sacramento, Helen in Spokane, Ed and June in Albany, New York, Marija in Los Angeles,
Helene in Fallbrook, California, Les and Nancy in Mimbres, New Mexico. My apologies if I'm mispronouncing names or cities. I probably am, but Roberta in Sun Lakes, Arizona, Kathy and Ken in Bellingham, Washington, Bob and Carol in Bandon, Oregon, Debbie in Prior Lake, Minnesota, Jim in Fenton, Michigan, Kim in Mount Vernon, Washington, John and Barbara in Newburgh, Oregon, and Carol in Eagan, Michigan. Thank you to each one of you. These matching grants are actually a big deal. When people who can afford offer a matching grant like this, it really encourages everybody else, which is you, to make a contribution right now and have that doubled. So please call 877-378-8669, 877-378-8669 right now, and make your gift to Free Speech TV. It is really an important time. I mean, this is a time when the media is really failing at their job. They're not informing people. They're letting all these right-wing talking points, rise to the top and proliferate. The election in the Carolinas right now, I don't recall if it's north or south, but that Bishop McCready election that's happening at this moment today is a great example. I mean, that election is happening because the previous Republican candidate had hired a guy who went around and collected absentee ballots from people, and if they voted for Democrats, destroyed them. And I mean, it even went beyond that, but it was just pure and simple election fraud by Republicans. And I say Republicans plural because this guy's been doing this for other Republican candidates for years. And meanwhile, the Republicans are running around the country trying to make it harder and harder and harder for people to vote. Ohio is purging 200,000 people from the rolls. There's a black woman in Texas who's sitting in prison right now because she registered to vote when she was a felon. And, Greg Abbott and buddies decided to make an example of her. I mean, the Republicans really don't want you to vote. And the media doesn't really want to talk about this. Here on Free Speech TV, you get the whole story. And that's a pretty big deal. It's really worth supporting. 877-378-8669. With a $20 gift, you get the Thom Hartmann 2020 bumper sticker. With a $50 gift, you get the Change the Channel Free Speech TV tote bag. With a $100 gift, there's any functional adult long sleeve shirt in sizes small through triple or double X large. With a $150 gift, my new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, will be out in a few weeks, and you'll get an autographed copy for $150. With a $250 gift, we're going to do a virtual meet and greet online. And with a $1,000 gift, come to Portland and hang out with us. Actually, there's some people coming this Friday, and we're going to have a real nice time. It's going to be I think this month, it's a relatively small group. I think we're going to have 4 or 5, 6 people, something like that here. And, hang out and watch the last hour of the show and then go grab lunch with us. And, it's sweet. I learn things, hopefully. People who show up learn things, find it of value, find it interesting, things like that. So anyhow, that's the bottom line is, Free Speech TV needs your help. Maybe I was a little too enthusiastic yesterday about how cool everything is, that our show has been growing, Free Speech TV is growing, all this stuff is coming together, and it's because the donations were down yesterday. We need to make that back up. So please call today, 877-378-8669. And whatever you contribute will be doubled, which is just a big deal. I mean, with the help of all these wonderful people who made matching grants, who explicitly, intentionally made matching grants, contacted Free Speech TV and said, I'd like to encourage other people to give, and so I'll match their gifts. Up to $12,000. This is really cool. This is really substantial. So there's never a better time than now. Well, it's always a good time, I suppose, to contribute to Free Speech TV. You can do it 365 days a year. You can do one-time gifts. You can do sustaining gifts. However you do it, it helps keep this network alive, and that's a really important thing. Keeping Free Speech TV on the air, as with all progressive media. We are all facing challenges, and substantial challenges in many cases. Algorithms from big media companies and search engines and things like that don't particularly favor progressive points of view. The corporatization of the media, so that the media doesn't talk about, in any depth the actual issues that are being pursued. You find it all here. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I'm going to get back to your calls in just a moment on how bad could it get if the Republicans not only continue to hold the Senate and the White House after 2020, but even consolidate more power. We're doing a deep dive into this, but there is something going on in Los Angeles, and hopefully it'll soon spread all over the country, that I wanted you all to know about. And this has to do with this the HBO film Ice on Fire that I participated in, and Leila Conners is the director of. George DiCaprio was the producer. Leonardo narrated it. It is just an amazing, amazing movie, and you need to get out to see it. And on the line with us is Leila Conners herself. Her Twitter handle at Leila Conners, and treemedia.com is her company and the website. And Leila, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Tom. How are you?
I am great. It's great to have you on. So tell me about this special screening tonight in Los Angeles and whether it's sold out or not yet.
There are still some tickets, although I think 2,000 people have RSVP'd. It's a wonderful opportunity for the LA community, thrown by the Wiltern Theater. And they're asking people who are interested in climate and what to do about it. The solutions are all in the lobby. There are several local nonprofits that are going to be there talking about what they're going to be doing for LA. LA Transit, LA Sanitation are there, LA Metro, Surfrider, Heal the Bay. I mean, I think there's 14 groups, and I'll be doing a panel with other people to discuss what we can do locally here in LA, but also globally. We're talking about Catching Carbon, which is a new initiative off of Ice on Fire that allows people to draw down carbon at catchingcarbon.org. It is a effort to see, can the global community come together, individuals, rather than waiting for politicians, governments, big corporations? What about if we all decide to plant kelp farms, plant trees, put in biochar, help put these machines up in Iceland that turn carbon into stone? What happens if we can just do it ourselves?
Yeah, there you go. And is there a charge for this?
No, it's free.
It's free
to the public.
Wow. So, if somebody wants to know about this, do they go to your website at treemedia.com, or is there someplace else to come see this screening tonight in Los Angeles?
If you want to see it, just go to the Wiltern Theater webpage or universe.com and search for Ice on Fire in Los Angeles. Okay,
and the Wiltern Theater is WILTERN.com, right?
Correct.
Okay, yeah. So you do have to have a ticket, and tickets will be limited, and probably, I believe the theater holds 3,000. It's about two-thirds gone now, so get over there and sign up. Leila, you have done such a spectacular job with this. I'm so honored to have played a small role in this movie, and thank you for dropping by today and giving us a heads up on this.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, Tom, and as always, thanks for the work you do. Always
a pleasure and an honor. So get over to Wiltern, WILTERN.com, and of course treemedia.com, and tonight, Leila's going to be doing some really cool stuff there. Thanks again, Leila.
Thank you, Tom.
Yep, have a great one. Okay, back to our conversation, about the Trump administration and where this might go. Linda in Coconut Creek, Florida. Hey, Linda, what's up?
I thought that was a brilliant question that you just put out there for us. And I believe if we should lose, my honesty is everybody keeps saying, oh, they're not going to touch Social Security and Medicare. Well, they touched the veterans' benefits. They touched Puerto Rico's, aid money.
Yeah. And George W. Bush just, worked his butt off in 2005 to try to privatize Social Security, to entirely destroy it. He was not successful. I'm just shocked that the media seems to have complete amnesia about this, as well as most of the American people, and certainly all of the Republican Party.
That's what I see. I see it coming, Tom. I really see it coming. That's why your vote counts.
Yeah. Amen.
Get out and vote.
Amen.
All right.
Okay, thanks a lot, Linda. Good to hear from you. Dottie in Chicago. Hey, Dottie, what's up?
Thank you, Tom. I agree with your previous caller, and I would say that everything that you said about legacy.
Dottie, your phone just got. Dottie, can you hear me? Dottie.
another reason that we all have to contribute and do as much as we can to make sure it doesn't happen.
Yes, I agree. I was trying to tell you that it was really getting hard to hear you, and I thought maybe your thumb was over the microphone or something. But yes, I absolutely agree.
Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, it can get a whole lot worse. And did you have any specifics you wanted to point out?
Well, I think that when you did the piece on the legacy of Trump, before you asked the question this morning, you touched on almost every single thing that could get worse. And I would, whether it's Social Security, Medicare, the judges, I mean, they will do what they can do with impunity. Right. And it will be much worse, I think, much, much worse. And it will be much harder, to get back, to even get back a little bit where we were before this all started. So I would say it hopefully is impetus to all of us to do what we can do in our own way to make sure it doesn't happen.
Yeah. Amen.
So it's everything. It's the social programs, it's the judges, it's war, whether it's Iran or Venezuela, it just goes on and on and on. Yeah. It is the taking away of rights, and the most vulnerable of us will be in the crosshairs 24/7.
Yeah.
It's, because they're not immigrants, they're refugees, and the Bahamas situation is just another instance of all of that.
Yep. Yeah. Well said, Dottie. Thank you very much. Arthur in Ontario, Canada, or California, excuse me. Listening on KPFK, in fact. Arthur, what's up?
Hi there, Tom. Thanks so much for what you do on the show.
Thank you.
I had a quick question. A couple of weeks ago, you talked about how the abortion policies by the Republicans are kind of part of their white supremacist strategy to produce more white babies.
Well, that's how it's sold. That's why the white supremacist community tends to be anti-abortion, because they're hysterical, or at least anti-abortion for white people, is that they're hysterical about the birth rates of non-whites and the abortion rates among whites. So what's your point, Arthur?
I wanted to posit an idea. I feel like the fossil fuel companies also know that climate change is real. They just hide the evidence or bury it. And I really feel like climate change is intentional, because they know that it will cause essentially the mass murder of people of color in the global south and around the world. And it's intentional. They know what they're doing to change the environment, and they know that they will be protected as wealthy white supremacists.
Yeah, I'm not buying that, Arthur. I can see where you could come to that conclusion, but I think that they're just trying to get all the money they can. I mean, the consequence that you described is absolutely real. Poor people, people of color, around the world are going to be hit far worse by climate change than wealthy people who can afford to ride it out, or can live in gated communities, or can build bunkers and old missile silos or whatever. But I don't think that this is intentional. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Well, I think the consequence of a second Trump term, the specifics really aren't. That's kind of burying the lead. I think it will essentially lead to the end of this democracy.
I agree.
If this isn't enough, let me just say this. Albert Einstein had a friend who was immigrating from Switzerland. I think it was in the 1950s. I read this in one of his biographies. And the night before his citizenship hearing, Einstein was talking to him, and his friend said, I don't remember the scientist's name. He said, "This Constitution I read, I'm not so sure about it. I think there is opening for despotism here." And Einstein looked at him and said, "Don't say that at your hearing."
I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit there, Paul. Einstein looked at him and said what?
"Don't say this at your hearing tomorrow."
Oh, at your immigration hearing, yeah.
Yeah, and then I thought about, well, what does he mean by that? How could that happen? And now we're seeing it. And so what it will be, a second Trump term, Tom, will essentially be doubling down on apathy. That's on American apathy, on just saying we don't care. So the specific Social Security, Medicare, all this other stuff that disappears out from under us, that's just the consequence of the major disease. Yeah. If we've seen enough. If that's not enough, then I don't know what to say. Maybe the country does need to fall apart entirely. Maybe this is the grand experiment is over.
Yeah, that's the Susan Sarandon scenario. Really, the pot that we frogs are all in has been heating up slowly I think it slowly started heating up during the Nixon administration, and then it started rapidly heating up during the Reagan and first Bush administrations, and was reaching kind of a climax in 2000 before 9/11. George W. Bush was very unpopular, was widely viewed as an illegitimate president. He was having trouble getting anything done. I think the American people at that point were kind of on to the con. And then 9/11 happened, and Bush, brilliantly exploited that to have his two little wars, which have now cost us trillions and hundreds of thousands of dead and destroyed the reputation of the United States. But, hopefully, once again, Americans are figuring out the Republican con job, and we can walk back from this. But, for example, one of the pieces of evidence of this is how they're trying to disrupt our voting systems, and how Mitch McConnell won't do anything to protect our voting systems.
Okay, let me go back to your analogy of the frog in the pot of water when it's warming. At a certain point, the physiology becomes, even though you're about to boil slowly, your physiology, you can't get out. You're already physiologically disabled from getting out, even though you know.
Right.
But you've got to make one grand effort to get out, or you are going to boil slowly to death, because at a certain point, no matter whether you realize it or not, you can't get out.
Yeah, and I think we're there. And I think Trump brought this all to a head. And in some ways, this may be a really good thing. I mean, the American Republic might be a lot better for it. Thank you, Paul, for the call. The American Republic might be a lot better for it. But on the other hand, I think as I said yesterday, I think the major damage, and I'm gonna publish an op-ed on this probably today, maybe tomorrow, is that Trump has taught people how to be corrupt.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
He has set an example for future Republican presidents, governors, legislators on how to be corrupt right out in public. And welcome back, Patrick in Elizabeth, New Jersey. Hey, Patrick, thanks for watching us. What's up?
Hey, Tom, thank you a lot. As a guy in his 20s, I am so edified by watching your show, and I'm really inspired by how you're so dedicated to, studying history and finding how all of these things that have happened before give us a lot of perspective on what's happening right now.
Thank you, Patrick.
I want to let you know, I read two studies recently about the degradation of the chloropyrifos compound that you were talking about, that pesticide that Trump EPA said it was okay again.
Yeah.
Fermentation was shown to degrade it. So it was fermentation in kimchi and fermentation in fermented wheat, which would be example like sourdough.
So while it normally doesn't break down very readily in the environment, it can be degraded by bacterial action, right?
By a fungal, yeah.
Oh, fungal, yeah. It's yeast principally that does fermentation.
Right.
Or other fungi.
So I just want to share that with you. I wanted to let everyone who's listening to you know, if they haven't seen it, come over to YouTube. That's where I saw your TED Talk, which was, that Lincoln didn't fight the Civil War to free the corporations. That was absolutely fascinating.
Thank you.
Speaking of the corporations, it is a concern. We talk about what's going to happen for the next Republican president, XYZ. I mean, I'm even wondering about the next whatever president who really, they're very smart and they have lots of money behind them and they know how to work the levers a lot better than old silly man in office right now who knows how to. Isn't that something that we should really be concerned about for future, the presidents that have been set now and for future precedents, precedents set by Trump for future presidents of the United States?
Well, and not just the presidents. This article that I wrote, I finished it yesterday. I started working on it Sunday morning, and just sent it off to the Independent Media Institute, and I think they'll be probably syndicating it this afternoon. Suggests that it's not enough to go after the politicians. We have to do what the Justice Department did with the Nixon administration. There were 55 people in the Nixon administration who were convicted of felonies, who were convicted of crimes, and 15 of them went to prison, including the Attorney General, John Mitchell. And what that did is it sent a message to potential enablers. Now, that said, there were some 30 people who were indicted in the Reagan administration, and as I recall, about 5 or 6 of them went to prison. And there was slightly fewer than 30 that were in the George W. Bush administration, and a small number of them went to prison. The total number for Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama for all 3 of those administrations was 1 person, and that was during the Clinton administration. But Obama and Clinton and Carter had 0. But I think that if we don't start aggressively holding responsible the people who are saying "sir, yes, sir" to orders that should be defied because they're criminal orders, if we don't start doing that, we're going to have a big problem. I mean, these planes landing in Scotland I think this is just the tip of the iceberg of the corruption of our process. The for-profit prisons that are getting the contracts for putting kids in cages. All of this stuff is just evidence of this corruption. Patrick, thanks for the call. Thanks for watching us on YouTube. And thank you very much for your, I appreciate it. Thanks for your kind words. We'll be right back. It is 10 minutes before the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, 50 minutes past. Talk media for the sane among us, the place where despair is definitely not an option. We'll be right back. And welcome back. How much damage might Trump do if he's reelected, or the Republicans for that matter, if they continue to hold power? I mean, we look at all the damage that Mitch McConnell has already done. The House passed great legislation to tighten up our elections and make sure that foreign governments, be they Chinese, Russian, North Korean, Saudi, I mean, fill in the blanks. Foreign governments can't hack our elections. Mitch McConnell's refusing to allow that legislation to even have a hearing in the Senate, even though it passed the House of Representatives. Mark in Valley, Washington. Hey, Mark, you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah. Besides everything else, I agree with all the other points people brought up. I think that one of the first things Trump will do if he gets reelected is go after birthright citizenship so he can set a precedent to strip citizenship away from people that object to him, period.
Oh, it's entirely possible. Birthright citizenship being that you are automatically a citizen if you were born here, not just through your parents. That wouldn't surprise me, and that's something that probably would not be all that controversial because, most of the countries, most of the developed democracies around the world actually don't have birthright citizenship. You have to have 1 or 2 parents who are actually citizens, and then it doesn't matter where you're born. But I think you're right. I think that that's definitely something that he'll go after. Thank you, Mark, for that. Rob in Temperance, Michigan. Hey, Rob, what's up?
Hey, compliments, Tom.
Thank you.
Hey, I just had a theory about this, and I don't know if I thought it out quite as thoroughly as I should, but Trump and these Republicans are really going after fossil fuel industries. We're going to corner the market in that kind of energy. And I wonder if this could lead to the rest of the world turning against us as far as boycotts or maybe even other types of financial retaliation, because they want to go towards renewable energy.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden we're going to be looked upon as being a pariah to the rest of the world.
Oh, I don't think that this is a future tense thing, Rob. I think this is happening right now. I mean, look at what happened at the G7. Basically, everybody looked at Trump and said, nah. I mean, they didn't even come up with a statement that everybody had to sign because they knew the guy is such a bozo that, he would disrupt it some way. I mean, it's literally the entire world is changing its behavior relative to Donald Trump. Now, in some places, it's getting worse. In the Philippines, Duterte is getting more and more murderous. In India, Modi is becoming more and more of a right-wing hack and using racism as a wedge and religiousism. I don't know what the word is, religious intolerance, I guess. Particularly explicitly against Muslims. In India, we're seeing Orban in Hungary. The guy who's the president of Poland. It's happening around the world where right-wing governments are being emboldened by Trump. And genuine democracies, functioning democracies, and more progressive countries are being horrified and turning away from him. So I think your point is really, really well taken. But I wouldn't put it in the future tense. I'd keep it in the present tense. Thanks a lot, Rob. Jill in Princeton, Minnesota. Hey, Jill, what's up?
Well, hi, Tom. I was watching First Civilizations and how it was where we were before we became a civilization, hunter-gatherers, anyway. Yeah. But what I'm really calling about is the We the People Amendment, 28th Amendment. Right. And we have so many in the House, but finally we have a United States Senator that said he will co-sponsor the We the People Amendment.
Now, the We the People Amendment, just before you continue, this is the amendment that says corporations are not persons, money is not speech, and we're going to overturn the citizens, and this amendment will overturn the Supreme Court Citizens United ruling, which codified all that.
Thank you, and let's reiterate the fact that it would regulate corporations.
Right.
We don't want to get rid of them.
Who is the senator who has taken a noble position here?
Well, it's Bernie Sanders.
Of course. Okay. I'll frankly be surprised if there aren't other senators who do this. Sheldon Whitehouse wrote an amazing piece a couple days ago in the Washington Post about how.
We're hoping for Elizabeth.
Say that again?
Elizabeth and Bernie.
Oh.
Elizabeth and Bernie.
Yeah.
Where else?
Yeah, of course.
I mean, come on, civilization.
Yeah, I'm with you, Jill. Thank you. And as I was saying, Sheldon Whitehouse wrote this brilliant piece about the Supreme Court and how it's become functionally an arm of the Republican Party, which is not how you want your Supreme Court to be. Harry in Huntsville, Alabama. Hey, Harry, what's up?
How you doing today, Tom?
Good. We have just a minute.
I just wanted to. Okay, I'll make it quick. I just wanted to point out, you said earlier that only one person had went to prison under the Obama and Clinton administration. And I wanted to point out, now I'm not either one, but I wanted to point out that, we can't really base our view on that because of the two-tier justice system that we're seeing in America today, with the Democrats being almost impervious to things in the justice system.
So, no, I think what has happened is that the Republicans, well, basically the Democratic Party is about getting things done for people, and the Republican Party doesn't believe that government has any role in doing things for people, that the purpose of government is to basically have police and maybe fire departments, although some Republicans, like Ron Paul, are even calling for privatizing fire departments. And so, when the Democrats have power, they try to get things done, good, positive accomplishments. When the Republicans have power, they try to make money. They try to fatten the wallet of their buddies. They try to, accomplish the things that are going to cause the polluting industries and other, big fat cat Republican donors to give them more money. And as a result, the Republicans get caught in these scandals. That's why you had 55 people busted in the Nixon administration.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, you know, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, you know, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com. Well, great news today. Free Speech TV and a bunch of donors actually. I'm going to go through the list here in just a moment. Got together, and this group of donors are all offering matching gifts, and in aggregate, it adds up to $12,000. So your donation today, up to $12,000, will be matched, and therefore doubled. So you give $10 to Free Speech, it becomes $20. You give $50 to Free Speech, it becomes $100. Excuse me, you give $200 to Free Speech TV, it becomes $400. You give $1,000, it becomes $2,000 to Free Speech, whatever it may be. So with many thanks, so please call now. 877-378-8669 is the telephone number. And thanks to Anonymous in Sacramento, Helen in Spokane, Ed and June in Albany, New York, Marija in Los Angeles, Helene in Fallbrook, California, Les and Nancy in Mimbres, New Mexico. My apologies if I'm mispronouncing names or cities. I probably am, but Roberta in Sun Lakes, Arizona, Kathy and Ken in Bellingham, Washington, Bob and Carol in Bandon, Oregon, Debbie in Prior Lake, Minnesota, Jim in Fenton, Michigan, Kim in Mount Vernon, Washington, John and Barbara in Newburgh, Oregon, and Carol in Eagan, Michigan. Thank you to each one of you. These matching grants are actually a big deal. When people who can afford offer a matching grant like this, it really encourages everybody else, which is you, to make a contribution right now and have that doubled. So please call 877-378-8669, 877-378-8669 right now, and make your gift to Free Speech TV. It is really an important time. I mean, this is a time when the media is really failing at their job. They're not informing people. They're letting all these right-wing talking points, rise to the top and proliferate. The election in the Carolinas right now, I don't recall if it's north or south, but that Bishop McCready election that's happening at this moment today is a great example. I mean, that election is happening because the previous Republican candidate had hired a guy who went around and collected absentee ballots from people, and if they voted for Democrats, destroyed them. And I mean, it even went beyond that, but it was just pure and simple election fraud by Republicans. And I say Republicans plural because this guy's been doing this for other Republican candidates for years. And meanwhile, the Republicans are running around the country trying to make it harder and harder and harder for people to vote. Ohio is purging 200,000 people from the rolls. There's a black woman in Texas who's sitting in prison right now because she registered to vote when she was a felon. And, Greg Abbott and buddies decided to make an example of her. I mean, the Republicans really don't want you to vote. And the media doesn't really want to talk about this. Here on Free Speech TV, you get the whole story. And that's a pretty big deal. It's really worth supporting. 877-378-8669. With a $20 gift, you get the Thom Hartmann 2020 bumper sticker. With a $50 gift, you get the Change the Channel Free Speech TV tote bag. With a $100 gift, there's any functional adult long sleeve shirt in sizes small through triple or double X large. With a $150 gift, my new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, will be out in a few weeks, and you'll get an autographed copy for $150. With a $250 gift, we're going to do a virtual meet and greet online. And with a $1,000 gift, come to Portland and hang out with us. Actually, there's some people coming this Friday, and we're going to have a real nice time.
It's going to be I think this month it's a relatively small group. I think we're going to have 4 or 5, 6 people, something like that here, and hang out and watch the last hour of the show, and then go grab lunch with us. And it's sweet. I learn things. Hopefully, people who show up learn things, find it of value, find it interesting, things like that. So anyhow, that's the bottom line. Is Free Speech TV needs your help. Maybe I was a little too enthusiastic yesterday about how cool everything is, that our show has been growing, Free Speech TV is growing, all this stuff is coming together, and because the donations were down yesterday. We need to make that back up. So please call today, 877-378-8669, and whatever you contribute will be doubled, which is just a big deal. I mean, with the help of all these wonderful people who made matching grants, who explicitly, intentionally made matching grants, contacted Free Speech TV and said, I'd like to encourage other people to give, and so I'll match their gifts up to $12,000. This is really cool. This is really substantial. So there's never a better time than now. Well, it's always a good time, I suppose, to contribute to Free Speech TV. You can do it 365 days a year. You can do one-time gifts. You can do sustaining gifts. However you do it, it helps keep this network alive, and that's a really important thing. Keeping Free Speech TV on the air, as with all progressive media, we are all facing challenges, and substantial challenges in many cases. Algorithms from big media companies and search engines and things like that don't particularly favor progressive points of view. The corporatization of the media, so that the media doesn't talk about, in any depth the actual issues that are being pursued. You find it all here.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Donald Trump fired John Bolton. Now there's a little whizzing war here between Trump and Bolton over whether, did you fire him or did he quit? This is incredible. John Bolton tweeted, I offered to resign. Donald Trump tweeted, I informed John Bolton last night that his services are no longer needed at the White House. I disagreed strongly with many of his suggestions, as did others in the administration, and therefore I asked John for his resignation, which was given to me this morning. Right. But Bolton tweets that last night he offered to resign, and Trump said, well, let's talk about it tomorrow. Trump is such a coward, he can't even fire a guy in person. He says, let's talk about it tomorrow. And then tomorrow morning, that's this morning, Trump tweets, Bolton's fired. My idea. You're fired. Right. We've been talking for the last hour about what happens to America if Donald Trump gets reelected. And I think that this is a very real question. I mean, will the transfer of wealth from working people to the top continue? Will the student debt burden continue to explode? Betsy DeVos now making it almost impossible for people who qualified because they got ripped off by for-profit universities to have their debt forgiven. She's blowing up that program, doing everything she can to destroy public education and increase the debt burden on people who want to go to college from based on just looking at this behavior, it seems. Is that going to happen? Is it going to be the destruction of our environment? Is that going to speed up? Is there going to be a final assault on the news media? And is the news media of the United States, as Trump was tweeting to one of the investors, one of the major shareholders in AT&T, which owns CNN, saying basically turn CNN into Fox News? Is that going to happen, and not just CNN? How much damage will be done by their war on science? What happens when the fundamentalists, the Jerry Falwell Jr.'s and the Franklin Grahams of the world burrow themselves even deeper into not only our political parties, but our systems of governance themselves and destroy and subvert the separation of church and state? Will Donald Trump plunge us into a war with Iran or Venezuela, the way George W. Bush did, lied us into a war with Iraq in order to get himself reelected in 2004? He was very upfront about that with Mickey Herskowitz, his biographer, in 1999. He said, hey, if I become president, I'm going to have a war with Iraq. And it's going to be a long enough lasting war that, unlike my daddy's 3-day war, I'm going to have a real war. So I'll get reelected and I'll have political capital that I can use to privatize Social Security. I mean, he just came right out and said it. And pretty much all of that. So is that going to happen? And then Trump saying in 2012 that he thought that Obama was going to start a war with Iran in order to get himself reelected. If Trump feels cornered, whether it's by an impeachment hearing, whether it's by public opinion turning against him, whatever it may be, if Trump feels cornered, is he going to try and start World War III in order to postpone the elections, or to distract us from something, or to blame some Democrat? Are we going to start seeing ICE rounding up liberals in addition to non-documented, by and large, Hispanics? What about the privatized prisons and the concentration camps that right now your tax dollars are spending $750 a night to have children kept in cages without toothbrushes, blankets, or mattresses? How is that going to be expanded? What about the pesticides? What about, and the increased pollution coming out of car exhaust pipes? And then what happens if there is no news? One of the study analyzed by the Washington Post suggests that, this is just amazing that when you tell Republicans actual news, not opinions, actual news about what Donald Trump has done, like stuff that's in the Mueller report, obstructing justice, trying desperately to collude with Russia, things like that, just the general corruption, that his approval rating goes down another 10%. But the Republicans aren't hearing this because they're living in this right-wing media ecosystem of Fox News, right-wing hate radio, and so they literally are not hearing these stories. 3 different House committees, for example, right now have just launched Intelligence, Oversight, and Reform and the Foreign Affairs Committee. 3 different committees are looking into whether Rudy Giuliani, on behalf of Donald Trump, Giuliani is Trump's personal lawyer. He doesn't work for the federal government. He works for Trump. And he's been doing shuttle diplomacy here with Ukraine, trying to essentially blackmail the Ukrainian government. Trump is holding back on military assistance to Ukraine. And Giuliani appears to be saying, well, this is from the Hill. This is a quote from the 3 chairmen of these 3 committees. They said, quote, "A growing public record indicates that for nearly 2 years, the president and his personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, appear to have acted outside legitimate law enforcement and diplomatic channels to coerce the Ukrainian government into pursuing 2 politically motivated investigations under the guise of anti-corruption activity." Specifically what they're looking at, Joe Biden, one of Joe Biden's sons, did some work in Ukraine. And they're trying to get the Ukrainian government to say, oh, it was corrupt. Amazing. George Takei, by the way, tweeting, in case you missed it, Trump banned Muslim women and children refugees, but invited the Taliban to Camp David. Oh, and by the way, now he's saying that the refugees from the Bahamas, oh, there's some black people in there. Look out. There's like gang members and drug dealers. See, this is the thing. I mean, we know this about Donald Trump literally his whole entire life. He sees black people, he thinks gang members and drug dealers. I mean, it's just, same with Hispanics. He said, everyone needs totally proper documentation because the Bahamas have some tremendous problems with people going to the Bahamas who weren't supposed to be there. He's probably talking about there's several thousand, in fact, in particular in this, as a Marsh City or some name like that, in the Bahamas, that literally every building was flattened, or virtually every building was flattened. And thousands of people are missing. So some best estimates around 6,000 people missing, probably most of them dead. And now they're starting to find bodies by smell because people are starting to decompose. But there were several thousand Haitian refugees in the Bahamas who had fled to the Bahamas after that giant earthquake a few years back that killed so many people. They were left homeless. They were left penniless. They went to the Bahamas to try to, for refuge. And Trump wants to make sure that those Haitians don't make their way to the United States. Well, black people in Haiti. We actually once had a slave revolt. It frightened the founders of this republic. Apparently, it still frightens Trump. But 70,000 people have been left homeless in the Bahamas. And Marco Rubio is out there tweeting, Bahamians with a valid passport and clean record can enter the U.S. without a visa. Well, I'm wondering how many people had the presence of mind once they knew that a hurricane was coming to dig out their passport and get a report from the Bahamian government certifying that they've never been convicted of a crime and stick that in a waterproof compartment inside their own clothing, so when they have to flee or hide or whatever, they'll have this stuff. I mean, just, human nature. I would think most of these people have literally lost everything, including their passports. But Trump doesn't want any more refugees coming to this country unless they're coming from Norway, This is bizarre. And then we've got, this is incredible. Donald Trump tweets a picture, a highly classified intelligence picture of a missile launch site in Iran. And so suddenly the Iranians, the Russians, the Chinese, any government that might want to know how our spy technology works, now they know. This was super top secret. Trump tweeted it, for God's sake. And now we discover that, right after he was installed in the White House, he invited the Russian ambassador over, Sergei Kislyak, and the Russian foreign minister, and laid out to them a top secret piece of information that Israel had given us, burning a spy. And we still had a spy inside the Kremlin. And now we're learning that right after that happened, the CIA said, oh my God, we can't trust Donald Trump. We've got to get our spy out of the Kremlin. And they flew him to the United States, where apparently he's living in D.C. or in the D.C. area. And this is bizarre. This was CNN's big scoop yesterday. Can you imagine if Barack Obama had burned a spy? They would be calling for him to be shot by firing squad, the Republicans. They would be calling it treason. They'd be calling him a traitor. They would be screaming from the rooftops. Now, the Democrats are pretty upset, and they've launched an investigation into this. But, Democrats tend not to be so hyperbolic as Republicans. But this is mind-boggling. And then, oh no, it's moron versus moron. Guy Whitey Corngood wrote this over at DU, Democratic Underground. Ivanka and Donald Trump Jr. are apparently in a cold war over who's going to secede, who's going to follow Daddy when he leaves the empire or croaks or whatever happens. He's in his 70s and he's obese. Who's going to take over? Louise and I started watching this series. I think it's on HBO, Secession, and the first 5-6 episodes were almost cartoonish. It's about this, basically the Murdoch family, only it's a fictitious family. But, they own this giant media empire, and among other things. And, the old man, the guy who built the thing, is, a smart businessman who is absolutely ruthless and kind of a pseudo-sociopath. But his kids and the people around him are all just total bumbling idiots. Pathetic. And the first couple of episodes of Secession were just almost too cartoonish for me. But now it's starting to get really interesting. But it's like, this is, you watch this TV show and you go, really? And then this story comes out, citing AIDS officials and former Trump Organization employees. A report from The Atlantic painted a picture of siblings, that would be Don Jr. and Ivanka, who are constantly vying for their father's attention and approval. Don Trump Jr. apparently told Ivanka, after a negative story about him was in the press, "Tell your people to stop trashing me to the media." Right. So, interesting times. Oh, and the news out of Liberty University, I got to tell you about that too. This is getting very, very strange. And your tattoo might be leaking metal into your lymph nodes. And the apps are now telling Facebook when you have sex. I got a bunch of stuff. And the economy, we got a bunch of stuff to talk about. I'll get to after the break. And in the following hour, And we'll continue our conversations from the previous hour about what happens if these guys get reelected.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
There is, of course, an election in North Carolina today. It's going to be real interesting to see how that one plays out. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Let me get everything all set here. What's going on? There we go. All righty. Tom in Martinsburg, West Virginia. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
Well, on top of what everybody else said, okay, say bye-bye to our publicly owned lands.
Oh, yeah. I completely forgot about the Interior Department. Yes.
I mean, and maybe the federal highway system, too.
Yeah, the Republicans have on a number of occasions tried to privatize it. Mike Pence actually did that in Indiana. He sold a good chunk of the Indiana highways off to, I believe it was an Australian company. It might be a Spanish company. There's two major companies that have been buying, roads, public roads in the United States and turning them into toll roads. Excellent point.
Yeah. And, as I told your screener, that one of the Koch brothers said they want to own everything.
Yeah.
And it started, and that's where it'll probably end up.
Yeah, well, that would fit with the idea that what we're looking at when you look at people like the Koch brothers and the Walton family is actually hoarding syndrome. It's they're as afraid as somebody who's unemployed. It's just that their fear gets redirected into hoarding money. Had they been born poor, they'd have 500 newspapers and old tin cans in their living room. Tom, thanks for the call. Good one. Michael in Denver. Hey, Michael, your thoughts?
Hello. Good morning, Tom. Tom, I was calling up. Corruption here is seeping into our military, and especially here with what we're finding out over the last couple of days. The ferrying flights back and forth, supply flights. When I'm a 22-year Navy veteran. We've talked before, and all. I never stayed at the Ritz or at the Waldorf Astoria, and wherever in Japan or in Italy or anything like that where I was.
Well, your per diems wouldn't allow it, Michael.
No, absolutely. And per diems haven't gone up all that much. I mean, money changes, but everything is expensive. But what I wanted to say in general terms is, number one, the brass hats, and you talked about it very recently, how the officer corps is very much Republican. I believe that the enlisted corps is maybe a small majority Democratic. Okay, more Democratic than Republican.
I think you might have it backwards. The officer corps is college educated. I'm thinking they're probably more likely to be Democratic or simply horrified by what's going on. And the enlisted men and women are more likely to be, Yahoo kind of, people without college educations. Many of them came out of poverty. I guess the one thing is that argues against that is that among the enlisted population, you have a disproportionate number of minorities compared to the general population.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's why I feel that they're a little bit more on the Democratic side, especially now in these days. And one last thing, I hear your music and everything else, but just in general terms, I tell the people at the Pentagon, remember, first day out, you swore to the Constitution of the United States, not to a president, not to the executive branch or anything else.
Amen. And the same is true, by the way, of every legislator. So, spot on, Michael. Thank you very much for the call. We'll be right back. So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high sugar, high salt, high fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
So what happens, with the Republican administration? Will more people die? I mean, look at the Flint water crisis, right? This was in the state of Michigan. The guy who was in charge of the health department in Michigan, the state health director, he was an appointee of Rick Snyder, the Republican governor. So he had a Republican health commissioner. His name was Nick Lyon. And Frontline just did a special on this. And it's a pretty damn shocking thing. And one of the guys, there was this meeting. It had been 4 months. This was May of 2016. It was 4 months after Rick Snyder acknowledged publicly that there was not only, the Flint water supply was poisoning Flint, but that there was this outbreak of Legionnaire's disease, which, by the way, was being spread by this water. And so this from pbs.org. The group knew how Legionnaire's disease, a severe form of pneumonia caused by the waterborne Legionella bacteria, operates. And they knew that once it got warmer out, people were going to start dying. And so in May, they met with State Health Director Nick Lyon to warn him that it was urgent to step up monitoring for Legionnaire's cases. I remember at one point, an engineering professor and chair of the panel, a fellow by the name of McElmurray, said, I remember at one point my colleague telling him, Nick Lyon, the state health director, Republican, my colleague telling him that if he didn't do that, if he didn't notify people about Legionnaire's disease and he didn't notify doctors to look for Legionnaire's disease when people come in with lung infections, I remember at one point my colleague telling him that if he didn't do that, people could die. Unfortunately, McElmurray said, Nick Lyon's response, the Republican state health commissioner in Michigan, the Rick Snyder's appointee, response was, quote, well, they'll have to die of something. And by the time that they had that meeting, 12 people had already died of Legionnaires. Now, I want to just expand on this a little bit, and maybe I'll get into it. In fact, we're going to hit a break here in about a half a minute, but you're seeing this vaping crisis across the country. People vaping pot, people vaping nicotine. People are starting to die from lung disease. How did we not know this was coming? Well, the reason why is because the industry for smokable products or inhalable products has been completely deregulated by politicians. This is Chicago School libertarian right-wing ideology, economic ideology applied to our democratic republic. The same thing in Flint, Michigan. I mean, it's like, the market will take care of these things, don't you know? This is nuts. This is how libertarian ideology works. Not well. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I'll be picking up your calls after the break, and we'll keep on rolling. Stick around. Well, great news today. Free Speech TV and a bunch of donors, actually, I'm going to go through the list here in just a moment, got together, and this group of donors are all offering matching gifts. And in aggregate, it adds up to $12,000. So your donation today, up to $12,000, will be matched and therefore doubled. So you give $10 to Free Speech, it becomes $20. You give $50 to Free Speech, it becomes $100. Excuse me, you give $200 to Free Speech TV, it becomes $400. You give $1,000, it becomes $2,000 to Free Speech, whatever it may be.
So with many thanks, so please call now. 877-378-8669 is the telephone number. And thanks to Anonymous in Sacramento, Helen in Spokane, Ed and June in Albany, New York, Marija in Los Angeles, Helene in Fallbrook, California, Les and Nancy in Mimbres, New Mexico. My apologies if I'm mispronouncing names or cities. I probably am, but Roberta in Sun Lakes, Arizona, Kathy and Ken in Bellingham, Washington, Bob and Carol in Bandon, Oregon, Debbie in Prior Lake, Minnesota, Jim in Fenton, Michigan, Kim in Mount Vernon, Washington, John and Barbara in Newburgh, Oregon, and Carol in Eagan, Michigan. Thank you to each one of you. These matching grants are actually a big deal. When people who can afford offer a matching grant like this, it really encourages everybody else, which is you, to make a contribution right now and have that doubled. So please call 877-378-8669, 877-378-8669 right now, and make your gift to Free Speech TV. It is really an important time. I mean, this is a time when the media is really failing at their job. They're not informing people. They're letting all these right-wing talking points, rise to the top and proliferate. The election in the Carolinas right now, I don't recall if it's north or south, but that Bishop McCready election that's happening at this moment today is a great example. I mean, that election is happening because the previous Republican candidate had hired a guy who went around and collected absentee ballots from people, and if they voted for Democrats, destroyed them. And I mean, it even went beyond that, but it was just pure and simple election fraud by Republicans. And I say Republicans plural because this guy's been doing this for other Republican candidates for years. And meanwhile, the Republicans are running around the country trying to make it harder and harder and harder for people to vote. Ohio is purging 200,000 people from the rolls. There's a black woman in Texas who's sitting in prison right now because she registered to vote when she was a felon. And, Greg Abbott and buddies decided to make an example of her. I mean, the Republicans really don't want you to vote. And the media doesn't really want to talk about this. Here on Free Speech TV, you get the whole story. And that's a pretty big deal. It's really worth supporting. 877-378-8669. With a $20 gift, you get the Thom Hartmann 2020 bumper sticker. With a $50 gift, you get the Change the Channel Free Speech TV tote bag. With a $100 gift, there's any functional adult long sleeve shirt in sizes small through triple or double X large. With a $150 gift, my new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, will be out in a few weeks, and you'll get an autographed copy for $150. With a $250 gift, we're going to do a virtual meet and greet online. And with a $1,000 gift, come to Portland and hang out with us. Actually, there's some people coming this Friday, and we're going to have a real nice time. It's going to be I think this month it's a relatively small group. I think we're going to have 4 or 5, 6 people, something like that here. And hang out and watch the last hour of the show, and then go grab lunch with us. And it's sweet. I learn things. Hopefully, people who show up learn things, find it of value, find it interesting, things like that. So anyhow, that's the bottom line. Is Free Speech TV needs your help. Maybe I was a little too enthusiastic yesterday about how cool everything is. That our show has been growing, Free Speech TV is growing, all this stuff is coming together, and it's because the donations were down yesterday. We need to make that back up. So please call today, 877-378-8669, and whatever you contribute will be doubled, which is just a big deal. I mean, with the help of all these wonderful people who made matching grants, who explicitly, intentionally made matching grants, contacted Free Speech TV and said, I'd like to encourage other people to give, and so I'll match their gifts up to $12,000. This is really cool. This is really substantial. So there's never a better time than now. Well, it's always a good time, I suppose, to contribute to Free Speech TV. You can do it 365 days a year. You can do one-time gifts. You can do sustaining gifts. However you do it, it helps keep this network alive, and that's a really important thing. Keeping Free Speech TV on the air, as with all progressive media, we are all facing challenges, and substantial challenges in many cases. algorithms from big media companies and search engines and things like that that don't particularly favor progressive points of view. The corporatization of the media, so that the media doesn't talk about, in any depth the actual issues that are being pursued. You find it all here. So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see. Let's pick up some phone calls. Well, this is interesting. James in Winston-Salem, North Carolina says here, you disagree with me and want to know why I'm always trashing Trump. Do I have that right, James?
Yes. And first question I have is, are you going to shut your show down once Trump leaves office?
No, I've been doing the show for 16 years. I'm having a pretty good time.
Okay, well,
and I think we're doing an important public service. But why would you say that I'm trashing Trump? I think I'm just telling the truth about Trump. What have I said that is not true?
Well, I mean, every day, all this stuff you say, I never hear it on the main news. It's like you come up with all these stories that you don't hear about on the main news. So why should I believe what you're saying is true? Where do you get your information from?
There's a number of really good news sites, James, that I'd suggest you check out. Daily Kos, DAILYKOS.com, alternate.org, commondreams.org, rawstory.com. There's a bunch of good progressive news sites out there. You might try reading the New York Times and the Washington Post. I also read theguardian.com and the Financial Times. I read all four of those newspapers every day. Probably half my stuff comes out of there. DemocraticUnderground.com is a great website, to keep track of what's going on in terms of, it's kind of crowdsourced. All of these sources, when they make assertions, and anything that I say on this program is backed up by actual sources. I mean, there's actual links, and you can actually find the truth. You're absolutely right that a lot of these stories never make their way onto MSNBC or CNN. Certainly, they never make it into Fox News. This study that was just reported out, that analyzed by the Washington Post, that found that when people who are Trump supporters are exposed to actual true headlines, real headlines of real news that reflects poorly on Trump's judgment or behavior, things like, the over 100 attempts to collude with Russia that were documented in the Mueller report, or the 10 different times that he broke the law.
That was never proved, though, was it?
What was not proven, what was proven, James, was that he was so incompetent and his family were so incompetent, they couldn't pull it off. They reached out to the Russians on multiple occasions and tried to collaborate with them, tried to work with them. Certainly Trump, throughout the campaign, while he was lying to you and other Republican voters during the primary, he was saying, I have nothing to do with Russia. I got no business deals going in Russia. At that very time, he was negotiating for Trump Tower Moscow, which was supposed to go into high gear
when he lost the election. And when he won the election, he had to pull the plug on it. But he lied to you guys.
Right.
And, Fox doesn't talk about that, so you just don't know. So I feel it's important that people learn the other side of the story, James.
Well, there's always two sides of the story, right? So there's no reason for me to believe everything you're saying, too, because it's so colluded.
Oh, you should not believe anything I say, James. You should not believe anything I say. You should check it out. And that's why I just gave you pretty much all of the sources that I use every single day. I spend about 3 hours every day going through the news before the show, and then after the show, Louise and I spend another couple of hours going through the news and getting the next day's show ready. And I'm telling you, one of the things on this program, first of all, you'll notice when we came back in the break, I think you were the first caller I put on the air. Somebody disagrees with me, they go to the top of the list. You will not find that on Hannity's show, Limbaugh's show, Savage's show, any of the other right-wing shows. They are afraid of people who disagree with them. I welcome people who disagree with me because I can back up what I have to say, number one. And
well, Tom, it's like this. If you read two different stories about the Civil War in regards to Gettysburg, the battle, what happened, two different writers are going to give you two different aspects on what happened. What one believes happened, what the other believes happened. So how do you know which one really happened?
Well, probably if you
you want to believe. It's
probably
no.
If you read both of them, James. I mean, I really honor you, James. You are listening to the Progressive Channel on Sirius XM right now, and you're not a progressive. God bless you. I listen to the conservative channels on Sirius XM frequently when I'm driving around to find out what your side is saying. I think it's important that we listen to each other. And if I say, literally, James, if you can find any time when I say something that absolutely is not true, please call me and correct me on the air. I will put you on the air to correct me. And that's why I said, please, name one thing. Like you said about Gettysburg, you're right. There are people who are trying to reinvent history in ways that favor their political opinion or their ancestry or whatever it may be on both the Union side and the Confederate side. You're absolutely right. And that's why you want to read all of them. And then you also want to read the actual historians. And the equivalent of that today would be the actual news, reading your just general mainstream news, the New York Times, the Washington Post. Let's start doing that, James. Let's start figuring out what's going on. James, I thank you for the call and thank you for listening to this channel. I really appreciate it. I'm going to move along though. Thank you for the call. Here's another one. Randy in Jenison, Michigan. I got something wrong, Randy?
Yes, you did.
What did I get wrong?
Well, you're talking about Pence and the public or the privatization of the toll roads and all that stuff, and the highways and interstate system. And I do. I listen to you a lot, and I listen to Fox News, and I do my own research. And if you
good on you. What did I get wrong?
Whatever you want to do. These purchases and privatizations there's a lot of them done during the Obama administration.
Oh, I know. So this has been going on. This has been going on in a big way since the 80s, Randy. That was when the idea of privatization. In fact, really, it was the last year of the Carter administration. Jimmy Carter bought into some of this stuff because Maggie Thatcher was selling it. Which is that we need to privatize public functions, whether it's airports, whether whatever it may be. Yeah, spot on.
Well, you're coming off that it's a Pence and Trump deal, and Flint Water.
Yeah.
Flint Water. The city of Flint. The councilmen were all lifting their glasses, cheering up, "Oh, great job, great job." Flint blew it, and the EPA blew it because it was brought up to the EPA. The EPA gal resigned over it because they mishandled it completely.
You're right.
At that time, there were thousands of communities across the United States and millions of people, and it didn't get the press. It didn't say Obama's EPA screwed up. You don't even talk about that.
Well, if Obama's EPA was involved in that, then they did screw up big time. My understanding was that it was the state of Michigan that was doing this, and their public health department. I'll go back and look at the story.
EPA dropped the ball. EPA is in charge. I did wastewater for years in chrome plating, and I had to follow EPA guidelines and EPA regulations.
Right.
Regardless of, and the city could.
So, given all that, Randy, how do you feel about the Trump administration putting an oil lobbyist in charge of the EPA?
Well, then you're not already. You're saying that the guy's not ethical or
yes.
proper. You don't have any data to back that up yet. I don't agree with a lot of what Trump does.
They just moved all their scientists out of, they lost a whole big chunk of their scientists. I believe it was about half of them in some of these areas. I'd have to go back and get the specific details on it. And I'm trying to be very careful here, Randy. But this was an effort to cripple science inside the Environmental Protection Agency, as far as I can tell.
That's your take, yes.
Okay, well, why else would you move them out to Kansas City or wherever it was, someplace in the Midwest?
My take is you had the Obama administration and others that had an EPA administration that didn't do a darn thing to help people in their water situation, and now you're blaming Trump because.
Okay, so do you want the EPA to be aggressively regulating, or do you want the EPA to be deregulating? Which is it?
They should regulate what they have and make adjustments to what they have as needed.
Yeah, well, that sounds very reasonable. Randy, thank you for the call. What can I say? Will in Salem, Oregon. Hey, Will, what's up?
Hey, Tom, you were wondering about what happens to all of us if the Humpty Dumpty gets reelected.
Right.
I'm very interested in psychology, and I know you are too. And I think that Trump is really a case for why psychology is so incredibly important. And the bottom line is, I do think he's psychotic. I do. And the scary part about him, to me, the scariest part is he's going to be, if he gets reelected, he's going to be 75, very unhealthy. He knows it. He's not stupid about that. And knowing that he could keel over any second. And he is exactly the type of psyche that would love nothing more than take out this entire planet in a blaze of glory.
Oh, my God.
I really mean this.
You think he'll go down like Jim Jones did?
Yes.
Only Jim Jones could only control about 1,000 people. Donald Trump controls the most powerful country and military in the world.
Yes.
Wow. I can't argue against that, Will. It just scares the bejesus out of me. Thanks a lot. I hope not. I really hope not.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
But this is something that cult leaders do, and Trump is behaving more and more like a cult leader. Look at these rallies. I mean, people are like, they're following him around like deadheads. And welcome back. Let's see here. Sam in Canton, North Carolina. Hey, Sam, what's on your mind today?
Well, you were asking where this country is going to go, where we're already seem to be headed, especially if little Donnie wins in 2020.
Right.
Read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich.
I read it in 1987.
Yeah, I read it a pretty good while ago, too, but it's still pretty scary. If you don't have time for that, there's a really good article in Common Dreams called Leading Civil Rights Lawyer Shows 20 Ways Trump is Copying Hitler's Early Rhetoric and Policies. It's a kind of a long article, but
is it up right now?
Nails it on. Yeah, it's up there right now. It should be. I found it on Reddit Politics. I've got it up on my monitor right now.
Yeah.
It's really good.
Can you tweet it at me, Sam?
Well,
if you can't, that's okay. I'll go find it. It sounds interesting. Yeah, I do read Common Dreams regularly.
It shouldn't take but a minute. Yeah. And the last caller that said little Donnie is psychotic, the fall of the Third Reich, the last few days that Hitler was alive in the bunker, he started yelling and screaming that the German people had failed him and that they all deserved to die.
Yeah. One of my closest friends back in the 80s and 90s was a guy named Armin Lehman, and Armin wrote a book called In the Führer's Bunker. Armin was the 16-year-old kid who delivered the news personally to Adolf Hitler that the war was lost, and then watched Hitler go in the room and commit suicide. My friend Armin, and he's been on this program a bunch of times. Armin passed away a few years ago. But he came on this program and told the story. He wrote a book about it, and he talked. The thing that really struck me when Armin was describing how Hitler behaved when he gave him this news was that Hitler was trembling, that his hands were shaking, he said his eyes were jerky, were going all over the place. And he didn't know if he was totally jacked on methamphetamine, because at that time Hitler was shooting both speed and oh, what's the drug that they give to heroin addicts? Whatever.
Methadone.
Yeah, there you go. Methadone.
Yeah, Dr. Morell is shooting him full of all kinds of stuff. I've read the book, The Bunker, as well, and it's really, if you read the book, and it isn't all that long, it's not a difficult read, and then look at the way Little Donnie is acting, it is very frightening.
Yeah.
And remember, Little Donnie has control of the nuclear launch codes. Yeah, sleep well tonight, everybody.
I'm wondering, Sam, how that would play out. I mean, if the one thing that gives me some encouragement is that Trump has now fired John Bolton, and that he campaigned actually on a platform of no more stupid wars, and he may actually believe that. I'm hoping that he believes that. I guess I'm the eternal optimist. If he were to try to launch a war just to get himself reelected, I wonder if the U.S. military would go along with it or not. I mean, throwing a few $million bucks to his favorite airport is one thing. Starting a war is a whole other thing.
Well, it depends on whether or not our military people are actually going to live up to their oath to protect and support the Constitution instead of a certain man.
Yeah. Yeah.
If they support the Constitution, we'll be in the clear.
I'm with you. But that's the oath that every Republican in Congress took, and I don't see any of them doing that either. But anyhow, Sam, thanks a lot for the call.
Yeah.
Good talking with you. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour? Yeah, 50. And we're going to check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world. Stick around. So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do. Ellen Ratner's new book. On the line with us is Doug Christian. Hey, Doug, so I know John Bolton resigned, and he's saying he resigned, and Trump is saying, no, I fired him. But apparently Trump says to his face, we'll talk tomorrow, and then tomorrow he tweets it. Do I have that right?
Yeah, you do, and John Bolton said the same. They're just clearly Trump does not like to be for somebody to say that they're going to leave him. He needs to fire.
Yeah. He's afraid to fire people to their face. I mean, we know this from several of his cabinet officials and others. But B, he doesn't ever want anybody to think that he's not the tough guy who fired people. So what else is up in the world?
Well, two of his cabinet secretaries just came out of the briefing room where I was just at, and that was Secretary Pompeo and Mnuchin, talking about how their war on terror, how they're strengthening their war on terror. And, of course, they took a few questions. I tried to get a question in, but everybody raised their hand. Of course, the overwhelming question is: was there a power struggle within the administration, and did between Bolton and Pompeo specifically, and did Pompeo win that round?
It seems like the answer would be yes.
Yeah, I think it was. They had markedly different views on many things, specifically the broken talks between the Taliban and the United States that were to take place in Camp David. Bolton was fiercely against those talks, and Pompeo was agreed more with the president. Many allies worry that there are not any kind of preconditions whereby the Taliban says, look, we're not going to harbor terrorists such as we did in 2001. We're not going to work with the Hassani network, or other terrorist rings, or perform terrorist acts themselves, and how they're going to treat the government and how they're going to treat women. The Afghani government was totally blindsided by these talks. It's interesting. It's very interesting how Congress has been responding to Trump's tweet about the talks, and that is that people who don't want to criticize Trump, what they say is, we agree wholeheartedly in him canceling the talks. That was very strong of him. That was a good thing for him to do. Yeah. And that way they don't have to say anything negative. They're only saying positive, but they're saying it positive with a negative twist.
Yeah, I get it. It's like being in the court of a mad king. You're there in the White House. You're talking to us right now from the Talk Media News studio downstairs in the basement of the White House.
Right. Yeah.
And you're there pretty much every day or pretty regularly.
Every day.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so
every day. Yesterday.
And I know you were in the White House during the Obama administration too, were you not?
No, I wasn't.
Oh,
I was covering Capitol Hill then.
I see. Okay. Where I'm going with this is I'm wondering how morale is. You know, we're hearing now that Don Jr. and Ivanka are fighting with each other. It's like the TV show with the HBO series Succession. They're apparently in a battle with each other over who's going to lay claim to the Trump empire when Daddy goes or retires or whatever. And or goes to jail, and I'm wondering how that very same kind of dynamic, who's in favor, who's out of favor, and the way that Trump likes to pit people against each other. How is that affecting the morale in the White House?
It's really you don't feel it so much, at least in this level down in the press briefing rooms at all. You don't really see it too much, even within the kind of the most normal White House things. Weirdly enough, you're more likely to really capture that among the social circles in New York City, where both Don Jr. and Ivanka have their own networks that kind of really keep in touch with each other that way. And the reporters that were reporting on them keep really tight with those social networks to really know what's going on. You mean
Don Jr. and Ivanka have separate groups of presumably billionaire buddies?
Absolutely, they do. Absolutely, they do. And they, and Ivanka has different interests altogether. Where Donald Jr. goes out game hunting for lions that were raised in captivity and then sent out to be hunted. Ivanka goes camping with Jared, which seems so out of place with her kind of princessly demeanor in the White House, but that's what she does. She also has been known to go on these extended hikes and many other very interesting things, actually. I mean, she's a complicated person.
Yeah, I've heard. Doug Christian with Talk Media News. Thanks, Doug.
You bet.
Good talking with you. We'll be back. We're going to continue this conversation about, this kind of ongoing conversation we've been having about what's the fate and future of the United States if Donald Trump gets reelected, or even just if the Republicans continue to control the majority of our states and the majority of seats in the U.S. Senate.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Well, great news today. Free Speech TV and a bunch of donors actually. I'm going to go through the list here in just a moment. Got together, and this group of donors are all offering matching gifts, and in aggregate, it adds up to $12,000. So your donation today, up to $12,000, will be matched, and therefore doubled. So you give $10 to Free Speech, it becomes $20. You give $50 to Free Speech, it becomes $100. Excuse me, you give $200 to Free Speech TV, it becomes $400. You give $1,000, it becomes $2,000 to Free Speech, whatever it may be. So with many thanks, so please call now. 877-378-8669 is the telephone number. And thanks to Anonymous in Sacramento, Helen in Spokane, Ed and June in Albany, New York, Marija in Los Angeles, Helene in Fallbrook, California, Les and Nancy in Mimbres, New Mexico. My apologies if I'm mispronouncing names or cities. I probably am, but Roberta in Sun Lakes, Arizona, Kathy and Ken in Bellingham, Washington, Bob and Carol in Bandon, Oregon, Debbie in Prior Lake, Minnesota, Jim in Fenton, Michigan, Kim in Mount Vernon, Washington, John and Barbara in Newburgh, Oregon, and Carol in Eagan, Michigan. Thank you to each one of you. These matching grants are actually a big deal. When people who can afford offer a matching grant like this, it really encourages everybody else, which is you, to make a contribution right now and have that doubled. So please call 877-378-8669, 877-378-8669 right now, and make your gift to Free Speech TV. It is really an important time. I mean, this is a time when the media is really failing at their job. They're not informing people. They're letting all these right-wing talking points, rise to the top and proliferate. The election in the Carolinas right now, I don't recall if it's north or south, but that Bishop McCready election that's happening at this moment today is a great example. I mean, that election is happening because the previous Republican candidate had hired a guy who went around and collected absentee ballots from people, and if they voted for Democrats, destroyed them. And I mean, it even went beyond that, but it was just pure and simple election fraud by Republicans. And I say Republicans plural because this guy's been doing this for other Republican candidates for years. And meanwhile, the Republicans are running around the country trying to make it harder and harder and harder for people to vote. Ohio is purging 200,000 people from the rolls. There's a black woman in Texas who's sitting in prison right now because she registered to vote when she was a felon. And, Greg Abbott and buddies decided to make an example of her. I mean, the Republicans really don't want you to vote. And the media doesn't really want to talk about this. Here on Free Speech TV, you get the whole story. And that's a pretty big deal. It's really worth supporting. 877-378-8669. With a $20 gift, you get the Thom Hartmann 2020 bumper sticker. With a $50 gift, you get the Change the Channel Free Speech TV tote bag. With a $100 gift, there's any functional adult long sleeve shirt in sizes small through triple or double X large. With a $150 gift, my new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, will be out in a few weeks, and you'll get an autographed copy for $150. With a $250 gift, we're going to do a virtual meet and greet online. And with a $1,000 gift, come to Portland and hang out with us. Actually, there's some people coming this Friday, and we're going to have a real nice time. It's going to be I think this month, it's a relatively small group. I think we're going to have 4 or 5, 6 people, something like that here. And, hang out and watch the last hour of the show and then go grab lunch with us. And, it's sweet. I learn things. Hopefully, people who show up learn things, find it of value, find it interesting, things like that. So anyhow, that's the bottom line is, Free Speech TV needs your help. Maybe I was a little too enthusiastic yesterday about how cool everything is, that our show has been growing, Free Speech TV is growing, all this stuff is coming together, and because the donations were down yesterday. We need to make that back up. So please call today, 877-378-8669. And whatever you contribute will be doubled, which is just a big deal. I mean, with the help of all these wonderful people who made matching grants, who explicitly, intentionally made matching grants, contacted Free Speech TV and said, I'd like to encourage other people to give.
and so I'll match their gifts up to $12,000. This is really cool. This is really substantial. So there's never a better time than now. Well, it's always a good time, I suppose, to contribute to Free Speech TV. You know, you can do it 365 days a year. You can do one-time gifts. You can do sustaining gifts. However you do it, it helps keep this network alive, and that's a really important thing. Keeping Free Speech TV on the air, as with all progressive media, we are all facing challenges, and substantial challenges in many cases. Algorithms from big media companies and search engines and things like that don't particularly favor progressive points of view. The corporatization of the media, so that the media doesn't talk about, in any depth the actual issues that are being pursued. You find it all here. So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at ThomHartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at ThomHartmann.com. Look for the video for our, the supporters of our program at ThomHartmann.com.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Land transfer was an existential one. This Land by Christopher Ketchum.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
There's some really shocking information coming out right now about what's going on with nuclear power, nuclear waste, nuclear accidents. And so let's check in with our old buddy Kevin Kamps. He's the radioactive waste specialist at beyondnuclear.org. The Twitter handler is Beyond Nuclear. Kevin, welcome back.
Hey, Tom. Good to be here. Thank you.
Great to have you with us. So, first of all, Fukushima, they have been accumulating massive amounts of radioactive water as they've been trying to keep these melted down reactor cores cool or keep them from blowing up. What's the status of all that right now?
Well, the environment minister under Shinzo Abe, the prime minister of the so-called Liberal Democratic Party, just said this morning that they have no option but to dump 1 million tons of highly radioactive water into the Pacific Ocean. They've been trying to get away with this for years, but the fishing cooperatives along that Japanese coastline and other governments like South Korea have stopped them thus far, but they keep pushing at it. And the upcoming Tokyo Olympics of 2020 are adding to the pressure. So we're talking, approaching 300 million gallons of highly radioactive water. And the environment minister said we need to dilute it in the ocean. And the lie there is that through bioaccumulation in the food chain, that hazardous radioactivity will reconcentrate and people will eat it in seafood.
So instead of just mercury in your tuna, you're going to have cesium.
And shamefully, there are American consultants, namely Lake Barrett, formerly of the Department of Energy, and Dale Klein, former chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, on hire to Tokyo Electric Power Company, pushing for this massive dump into the ocean.
Holy cow. Okay, so there's that. Now, also we're discovering that we have been subsidizing, I think it's kind of widely known and widely reported that we're spending worldwide hundreds of billions of dollars a year subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. The U.S. government spends a lot, billions of dollars every year subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. And we all know about the implicit subsidy through the Price-Anderson Act, which says that because nuclear reactors are so dangerous, literally no actual for-profit insurance company will insure any of them. So you and I do, the federal government does. And that's, a subsidy of sorts. But it turns out that there's actual dollar subsidies that individual states are paying to keep some of these reactors going. Tell me about this.
Well, just recently, July 27th, the Ohio legislature, in its lack of wisdom, approved a nearly $1 billion bailout for 2 reactors in Ohio, including Davis-Besse, one of the most dangerous reactors in the world. They're going to keep rolling the dice, keep rolling the radioactive Russian roulette wheel. And that's on people's electric bills against their will, even if they don't get electricity from the plant. If you live in Ohio, you're going to be paying towards that $1 billion bailout. But that's just the latest. There have been already more than $14 billion in old reactor bailouts in places like New York, Illinois, Connecticut, New Jersey. They're coming back in Pennsylvania. Some good news from Pennsylvania is 3 Mile Island Unit 1 is finally shutting down permanently, but they're going to try to bail out the rest of the reactors in the state. But again, this is just the tip of the iceberg. The Union of Concerned Scientists did a report in 2011 documenting not tens, but hundreds of billions of dollars in subsidies that the American people have put forward towards nuclear power in the last half century.
Yeah, this is mind-boggling. So the numbers I have, and let me know if any of these are inaccurate. New York State, $7.6 billion bailout for nuclear power. Illinois, $2.3 billion. And Exelon is coming back for a second round. New Jersey, $2.7 billion. Connecticut, $1.65 billion. Total, more or less, $15 billion. But that doesn't even scratch the surface of the cost of storing the nuclear waste that is at all these nuclear power plants all around the country that they want to put at Yucca Mountain. What's the price tag going to be for that?
The most recent estimate by the Department of Energy several years ago was $96 billion, so it's well over $100 billion now, just adjusting for inflation. But incredibly, through damage awards awarded by the U.S. court system, the nuclear power industry is raking in something like $500 million to $750 million per year in damage awards because the Department of Energy hasn't started taking the high-level radioactive waste away from the commercial reactors. So that's an outlay from the U.S. Treasury. It's called the Judgment Fund. So that's a taxpayer subsidy. And then people are paying the nuclear waste fee, or at least they used to until they ended it, towards Yucca, towards permanent geologic disposal. And that pot of money is over $40 billion, but they've stopped collecting. And it's going to, like I said before on the Yucca price tag, it's more than $40 billion. It's $100 billion. So guess what? They would come back to the U.S. taxpayers to take care of that shortfall.
And that stuff is still going to be, I mean, talk about the science of this for a minute. The science of what's happening with the Fukushima. If they dump 300 million gallons of highly radioactive waste water into the Pacific Ocean, how does that, you mentioned it would bioaccumulate the food chain. You want to explain that real quickly, and how might that affect us here in the United States, number one? And number two, what happens to nuclear waste over time?
Well, the main hazard in the Fukushima wastewater is tritium at nightmarish levels. Tritium is radioactive hydrogen, which means when ingested, when you eat fish, you can breathe it, you can drink it. But when it binds in your organs, tissues, and cells, it could stick around and do tremendous damage with beta radiation emissions at a very intimate level, right down to your DNA molecule. And that's how it can cause cancer, it can cause birth defects, it can cause genetic damage. So in terms of high-level radioactive waste, like here in the United States, it's deadly for more than 1 million years. We sued the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. They were forced to acknowledge there's 1 million years of hazard, but there's other radioactive poisons in there, like iodine-129, which is hazardous for 150 million years. So this is really forevermore hazard. It's a curse on all future generations. We have to keep it out of the environment somehow. Good luck with that, but we have to protect future generations. We need to stop making it is what needs to happen.
Yeah, amen. Isn't the radioactive iodine tied? I recall, this was years ago, reading a study, and I thought it came out of the Union of Concerned Scientists, that following the above-ground nuclear bomb tests out in the West, back in the late 50s, early 60s, I guess it was, that in the decade or two following that, as the plume of radioactive material traveled across the United States, within that plume, coming out of, the far west and spreading, as far north as northern Michigan and as far south as, I guess the central part of the South, maybe Atlanta area, that there was an increase, a measurable increase that kind of followed that plume of, in particular, women, but also some men getting thyroid disease and having to go on things like Synthroid or Armour for the rest of their lives as a consequence of exposure to that radioactive iodine. Am I remembering that correctly, or has that been disproven, Kevin?
No, it's been proven more and more over time as the government has finally been forced to admit what they did in Nevada in the 1950s, 1960s, and even after, because a third of the underground tests leaked. And radioactive iodine-131, which has a short half-life, a short hazardous persistence, but nonetheless caused this epidemic of thyroid disease in the United States. And the same thing happened at Chernobyl with that reactor explosion, meltdown, and also at Fukushima, massive amounts of iodine-131, which attacks the human thyroid gland. It has a 80-day hazard, but it does all that damage in that short period of time. But this other isotope, iodine-129, has 157 million years of hazard where it can attack your thyroid. And then cesium-137, another radioactive poison, also attacks the thyroid. So there are over 200 radioactive isotopes in high-level radioactive waste. We know the hazards of some of them. Some of them haven't even been studied. We don't even know what their hazards are. These are artificial radioactive poisons that didn't exist in nature before the atomic age.
And because they didn't exist in nature, the body doesn't quite know exactly what they are. I understand that there is one isotope, radioactive isotope, that the body mistakes for phosphorus, and so it absorbs it and buries it in our bones where it causes bone cancer. Another that it mistakes for potassium, and so it ends up in our muscles. One that it thinks is calcium. I clarify this for me. I may be wrong on these.
Right. So cesium-137 in the same row on the periodic table as potassium, the body mistakes it as something nutritious and useful. So the cesium-137 concentrates in muscle tissue and has caused epidemics like Chernobyl heart in newborns in Ukraine, Belarus, Russia. Strontium-90, the body mistakes for useful calcium, and it goes to the bones and is tremendously biologically hazardous. Plutonium, this artificial isotope, mimics iron and does tremendous damage in the human system. And we mentioned iodine, which in a place like Belarus is scarce in the food chain, and so Belarusian thyroid glands just ate it up, and now an epidemic of thyroid pathology in Belarus. But in Poland, they distributed potassium iodide tablets to people, and they averted at least that thyroid epidemic associated with iodine-131. But like I said, cesium-137 attacks the human thyroid. So Poland, even with that tablet distribution, didn't escape all health maladies. Remarkable stuff.
Kevin Kamps with the radioactive waste specialist with Beyond Nuclear. The website is beyondnuclear.org. If you want more details, it's a great website. Twitter handle @BeyondNuclear. Kevin, thanks so much for dropping by.
Thank you, Tom.
Good talking with you. We'll be back. We're going to continue our conversations about all this stuff that we have been digging into. What is the consequence, or what would the consequence be of a Republican victory in 2020, of Donald Trump winning?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And how might that affect us all? I mean, is this the end of the Republic, or is it just a bad day? We'll be right back. And welcome back. Let's see here. Bob in, where is it? Deerfield, Mass. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing? You guys mentioned Davis-Besse in Ohio. The one he said is one of the most dangerous nuke plants in the world. Well, I'm a former mechanical engineer, now a school teacher, and I used to work in the nuke industry. And about 2001, when I started at the company I ended up working at, the Davis-Besse had just had a near meltdown. It never made the news. And I'll make it a quick story, but there's a lot of technical stuff behind it, but I'll just hit the high points. What happened was every reactor head has a thin layer of stainless steel, and the rest of it's just carbon steel. And we have this amazing state-of-the-art, back in the 60s, metal called Inconel 6000 that was supposed to never crack when it was thermally expanding and contracting and expanding and contracting like they would in these extreme conditions in the nuke plants. Well, they did start to crack, and no one knew it. And one of the cracks cracked all the way through the stainless steel lining, got to the carbon steel, and just started rusting it away. And they have filters in these that filter out the coolant water, and the filters get changed, under a regular schedule. But here, the filters had to get changed every a quarter of the time than normal.
Right.
But people just kind of ignored it. Finally, they did a refueling, and someone was checking the insulation like they normally do, and went by one of the pipes that come out of the reactor vessel head and just put his hand on it as he was stabling himself, and the pipe just fell over.
Wow.
It was supposed to be embedded in 9 inches of carbon steel. All of that steel had completely rusted away. All that was left was a 1/2 inch layer of stainless steel underneath the at the very inside of the reactor head.
Right.
And they said that if it went for another 20 to 30 days, that pipe would have ejected during operations without anything to stop it. And all of the guts of the reactor just would have spilled into the containment area. And luckily, we have containment in North America, so it wouldn't have been a Chernobyl, but it would have made 3 Mile Island look like nothing.
Wow.
So it was, and it never even made the news. I was so shocked because I was new in the industry, and I'm like, how have I not heard about this?
Right.
And sure enough, they ended up having this huge reactor vessel head inspection team that went through, and I became a part of that. And we had to inspect every single reactor, every single refueling to make sure there was no cracking. It ended up being just an enormous mess. But how they were able to keep it out of the news was amazing.
Yeah. So does that cause you, now that you're no longer working in the nuclear industry, does it cause you to be more concerned about them?
Oh, for sure. I have gone the opposite direction. I'm a vegan because of climate change. I am, I do everything I can in the opposite. I have solar panels on my house. I have like a little 1,200 square foot, tiny house, so I can, cool. Kind of have a small footprint on this world. So yeah, I mean, straight out of college, you kind of drink the Kool-Aid of whatever you're being told, and just, that one scared me when I was there.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Bob, thanks a lot for the call, and thanks so much for listening to the program. We'll be right back. It's 21 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where speaking the truth, where we are speaking the truth to the multinational corporations we really rather you didn't know all about. So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
.com, so check it out. Thank you. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and let's see here. John in Crawfordville, Florida. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Actually, two things now that you mentioned the Fukushima situation and, of course, our domestic nuclear industry fiascos. I wanted to rebut what a gentleman talked about earlier, that it was the EPA that actually controls water quality. Actually, we function under the Clean Water Drinking Act, and which was put in place by the EPA. But it is the state agencies that are in control of water quality management. And of
that
course,
was my understanding. I thought it was the state of Michigan that dropped the ball on this thing, not the federal EPA.
Oh yes, entirely. To blame it on the EPA head of or EPA's arm in Michigan at that time is completely inappropriate from the things that I understood about following the case very closely as I do.
You said do you work for the EPA, John?
No, I actually was a lake manager and got all the certifications required because we were selling our water from the lake to the nearby town, which would then, purify it and then sort of send it back to us.
Right.
But I needed to have all of the certifications to test and manage not only our waste disposal system, but also the lake water itself to monitor its quality, because it was a farming community, and nearby we had concentrated animal feeding operations, the CAFOs that tend to pollute water sources. So I had to get all of that certification, but all of that came from state of Missouri classes that I took. And so it was the state itself that monitors all the water quality, and many people will be familiar with the report that you get from your community water system that is mandated by law to send you like a yearly report of what's in your water and whether it has violated or, what's in there, violations.
So basically, when the Republican Rick Snyder administration in Michigan dropped the ball and poisoned people in Flint, and this also had to do with their emergency manager changing the source of that water from Lake Erie, I guess it was, Lake Huron, to the Flint River. And the river water corroded the pipes, and that released the lead. When they dropped the ball, the Republican spinmeisters came out and said, well, this is really the Obama administration EPA. Is that what happened?
Essentially, from what I understand, that is correct. The EPA is, doing the best it can, but it quite often gets neutered and silenced by administrators within the states whose job it is to really follow those regulations. And of course, this is an ongoing battle of deregulation by the Republicans as, being too much of a burden on the economy versus the safety to the public on many things, including the nuclear industry.
Yeah, I mean, that's clearly, that was part of the agenda of the Republican Snyder administration. In Michigan, and it makes perfect sense. I mean, we're seeing the same thing played out right now with vaping products. I was talking about this in the last hour. This whole idea that libertarians have that you don't need regulations because when people start dying, people will stop using products. Well, why do you have to wait for people to start dying? But we're seeing that. I mean, we've got people dead now from vaping things because it's an unregulated industry. They should have tested it first on human cells and culture, or, like they do some shampoos and things on little animals, although I'm not fond of that at all. But, they should have tested it somehow before inflicting it on humans. So, yeah.
Well, you're doing a great job, Tom, and sports program, and
thank you, John.
Thanks. Good luck for the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So Donald Trump has fired 4 people now on Twitter, apparently. Apparently the people in the White House didn't learn about this until they saw Twitter this morning.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, great news today. Free Speech TV and a bunch of donors actually, I'm going to go through the list here in just a moment, got together, and this group of donors are all offering matching gifts. And in aggregate, it adds up to $12,000. So your donation today, up to $12,000, will be matched.
and therefore doubled. So you give $10 to free speech, it becomes $20. You give $50 to free speech, it becomes $100. Excuse me, you give $200 to Free Speech TV, it becomes $400. You give $1,000, it becomes $2,000 to free speech, whatever it may be. So with many thanks, so please call now. 877-378-8669 is the telephone number. And thanks to Anonymous in Sacramento, Helen in Spokane, Ed and June in Albany, New York, Marija in Los Angeles, Helene in Fallbrook, California, Les and Nancy in Mimbres, New Mexico. My apologies if I'm mispronouncing names or cities. I probably am, but Roberta in Sun Lakes, Arizona, Kathy and Ken in Bellingham, Washington, Bob and Carol in Bandon, Oregon, Debbie in Prior Lake, Minnesota, Jim in Fenton, Michigan, Kim in Mount Vernon, Washington, John and Barbara in Newburgh, Oregon, and Carol in Eagan, Michigan. Thank you to each one of you. These matching grants are actually a big deal. When people who can afford offer a matching grant like this, it really encourages everybody else, which is you, to make a contribution right now and have that doubled. So please call 877-378-8669, 877-378-8669 right now, and make your gift to Free Speech TV. It is really an important time. I mean, this is a time when the media is really failing at their job. They're not informing people. They're letting all these right-wing talking points, rise to the top and proliferate. The election in the Carolinas right now, I don't recall if it's north or south, but that Bishop McCready election that's happening at this moment today is a great example. I mean, that election is happening because the previous Republican candidate had hired a guy who went around and collected absentee ballots from people, and if they voted for Democrats, destroyed them. And I mean, it even went beyond that, but it was just pure and simple election fraud by Republicans. And I say Republicans plural because this guy's been doing this for other Republican candidates for years. And meanwhile, the Republicans are running around the country trying to make it harder and harder and harder for people to vote. Ohio is purging 200,000 people from the rolls. There's a black woman in Texas who's sitting in prison right now because she registered to vote when she was a felon. And, Greg Abbott and buddies decided to make an example of her. I mean, the Republicans really don't want you to vote. And the media doesn't really want to talk about this. Here on Free Speech TV, you get the whole story. And that's a pretty big deal. It's really worth supporting. 877-378-8669. With a $20 gift, you get the Thom Hartmann 2020 bumper sticker. With a $50 gift, you get the Change the Channel Free Speech TV tote bag. With a $100 gift, there's any functional adult long sleeve shirt in sizes small through triple or double X large. With a $150 gift, my new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, will be out in a few weeks, and you'll get an autographed copy for $150. With a $250 gift, we're going to do a virtual meet and greet online. And with a $1,000 gift, come to Portland and hang out with us. Actually, there's some people coming this Friday, and we're going to have a real nice time. It's going to be I think this month, it's a relatively small group. I think we're going to have 4 or 5, 6 people, something like that here. And, hang out and watch the last hour of the show and then go grab lunch with us. And, it's sweet. I learn things. Hopefully, people who show up learn things, find it of value, find it interesting, things like that. So anyhow, that's the bottom line is, Free Speech TV needs your help. Maybe I was a little too enthusiastic yesterday about how cool everything is, that our show has been growing, Free Speech TV is growing, all this stuff is coming together, and because the donations were down yesterday. We need to make that back up. So please call today, 877-378-8669, and whatever you contribute will be doubled, which is just a big deal. I mean, with the help of all these wonderful people who made matching grants, who explicitly, intentionally made matching grants, contacted Free Speech TV and said, I'd like to encourage other people to give, and so I'll match their gifts up to $12,000. This is really cool. This is really substantial. So there's never a better time than now. Well, it's always a good time, I suppose, to contribute to Free Speech TV. You can do it 365 days a year. You can do one-time gifts. You can do sustaining gifts. However you do it, it helps keep this network alive, and that's a really important thing. Keeping Free Speech TV on the air, as with all progressive media, we are all facing challenges, and substantial challenges in many cases. Algorithms from big media companies and search engines and things like that don't particularly favor progressive points of view. The corporatization of the media, so that the media doesn't talk about, in any depth, the actual issues that are being pursued. You find it all here. So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program.
Apparently, he took a Sharpie and scratched out John Bolton's face, right? But they're having this war, John Bolton and Donald Trump, on Twitter over whether he quit or was fired. Really? Really? Amazing. David in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Hey, David, it says you disagree with me here. What's that about?
Yeah, Tom. I could trace the roots back of what's going on all the way back to Roosevelt, when Smedley Butler exposed the conspiracy to overthrow FDR, that they didn't try those people, and also with I.B. Fabian and Prescott Bush. And those were the wealthy.
Yeah, it was I.G. Farben,
We've got this history of not prosecuting the wealthy when they do things, especially treasonous things. You look at what Johnston was saying on his tapes, that he couldn't let this be because the American people would riot if they knew that the Nixon administration had committed high treason on this with the peace talks.
Right.
Once again, I think what Al Gore did was he saw the real possibility that there had been blood in the streets if he had fought that Scalia decision to put Bush in office.
Right.
I think we need to, why has Donald Trump been able to get by for all these decades?
It was actually William Rehnquist who was the Chief Justice at that time. But yeah, I'm with you, David. And boy, I in my mind, I've been kind of originating everything with Nixon in the modern era. But you're absolutely right. There was an attempted coup against Franklin Roosevelt, and General Smedley Butler had been approached by a number of very wealthy industrialists. And to this day, I mean, we don't really know all the details of it. Smedley Butler, testified about it before Congress. In fact, there was 2 weeks of hearings, almost 2 weeks of hearings, but FDR shut down the hearings. He went to the Democrats who were running the hearings and said, "Stop! I don't want anybody getting ideas." And
they didn't put any of it in the record.
Yeah.
So we don't know the exact names, but we know, like from Henry Ford was one of them, and we know that this ideology was perpetuated. Yes, they kind of tucked their tails in, and I remember reading the book, Smedley's book,
War is a Racket.
Essentially, it came out.
Yeah.
Well, no, that was his pamphlet. The one about the plot to overthrow FDR.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And essentially, he came to those people and said, "Look, you either support my New Deal, or I'm going to start trying you for treason."
Right.
And they went along. And I think he did the wrong thing. He should have said, "Okay, we're going to start having trials."
Yeah.
And and that's how Donald Trump got all these passes in the '80s on all these deals that nobody went in and investigated. Nobody really went in and took him to.
Well, corruption in the real estate market industry is breathtaking. I mean, this is where the mafia hangs out, So.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, here in Oklahoma, I mean, we've got we've got whole neighborhoods where you look back in the deeds and you see where this lawyer traded this property from an Osage Indian or a Creek Indian for a bottle of whiskey.
Mm-hmm. Amazing.
And
Amazing. Yep. David, thank you.
This is all the way back to FDR.
Yeah, thank you for the reminder. I'll have to keep that in mind. David, thank you. Joe in Loxahatchee, Florida. Hey, Joe, what's up?
Oh, short and sweet. About an hour ago now, you were talking about the Republican on the telephone, and you could tell him right online if he ever calls in again and you remember it, that Florida privatized the motor vehicle department. The Homeland Security runs it, and California is privatizing their HOV lines.
Yeah, I've heard about that. Yeah, this is something that is fundamentally unhealthy. When you've got natural monopolies, things where competition is not possible. You know, whether it's the power coming into your house, the water supply coming into your house, the septic going out of your house, public roads, fire departments, police departments, armies. These are not things that should ever be prisons. These are not things that should ever be privatized, and for the very simple reason that the whole theory of privatization is that competition makes capitalism, essentially makes free enterprise run more efficiently. But in a natural monopoly, there is no competition. And so what does capitalism do? It gets bloated and it gets predatory and bad things happen. So, Joe, thanks for the information. That's a great one. I appreciate the call. Michael in Alexandria, Virginia. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hi, this is Mr. Thom Hartmann I'm speaking with.
That's me. You're on the air.
Hi, Tom. Hi, how are you doing today? Yes, I want to talk about about the Medicare for debate that's happening recently, and I just wanted to talk about that. You know, every day when I talk to people about Medicare for, they seem not to understand that what Medicare can do financially and socially. They think that Medicare is like communist. It's a communist. Government take over healthcare, but it's not. It's actually government financed healthcare. Privately delivered health care.
Right. Government takes over the paying of the bills. That's it.
Right. And so, because when I did yesterday, 2 days ago, I went to a festival to pass out flyers on Medicare for all.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at first it was a struggle to get a lot of people to go on board with Medicare for all because we were trying to petition the Montgomery County council members to persuade Congress to pass a resolution on Medicare for all.
Right.
That is being currently sponsored by Pramila Jayapal and Bernie Sanders.
Right. Good. So, but you were getting blowback from people saying, "Wait a minute, that's socialism."
Yeah, I did. I had backlash. I had one guy yesterday who was like, this guy was very defensive. So when I asked him if he was interested in learning about Medicare for all, he said to me, "Oh, Medicare was a great idea, but it's not going to happen in America because Scandinavia is a homogenous country." And he said, "Oh, did I argue with you?" No, don't argue with me.
Yeah, this is this bizarre argument that you hear on the right is that, countries that have black people in them or brown people in them can't do a national health care system because, there's multiple races. And what the hell does somebody's race have to do with whether or not, their health insurance is being paid for? I don't get it.
I don't get it either, right. And I was trying to tell the guy yesterday that I was about to do the math for guy. I told him, that's true that Scandinavia is smaller than America, but if we do the math, America has about 320 million people divided by 50 states. That's basically 6 million people who are either uninsured or underinsured in this country.
Right.
And so 6 million is equivalent to, I think 6 million is about equivalent to Denmark's population. And in that country alone, Denmark, the government's able to cover the citizens.
Yep. And not just Denmark. I mean, even Mexico does it. China is doing it now. Literally all over the world, people are adopting Medicare for all. Canada did it, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, and the Canadians love it. It just continues. So, Michael, thank you. Thank you for the call, and thanks for the insight there. Joe in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Hey, Joe, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's up?
Hey, Tom, pleasure to talk to you. Reason why I called on there was that a friend of mine called me and told me to go up to a place called Uniontown, which is 20 minutes from my house. In their mall, they have an antique mall inside the mall, and they have the American flag morphing into the Confederate flag on display in the big window.
You mean the Confederate battle flag? The traitor flag?
Yes. They have the American flag, and it morphs into the traitor flag. Yes.
What, on a TV screen kind of thing?
No, displayed. Someone made it, and they have it displayed in the window.
Oh, wow. Incredible. Well, I think, frankly, a lot of people who fly the Confederate flag or love the Confederate flag or whatever, haven't really, just seriously thought about the fact that this was a group of people who committed treason against the United States of America. They, as a consequence of that treason, some 600,000 to 800,000 Americans died. Generations were scarred. People were essentially, just the outcome of the Civil War was just so, it was just an insane tragedy. And it started with treason. And the battle flag is not the official flag of the Confederacy. That's the flag of the people who were fighting against the Union. And it's the flag of treason. It literally is the flag of treason. So, when people display that, they really, somebody should tell them. Joe, thanks a lot for the call. Andre in Jersey City, New Jersey, listening on WBAI. Hey, Andre, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing today?
Good. What's on your mind?
I wanted to talk to you about the gun issue, the gun legislation issue.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you've been talking about doing background checks, and I support all that. That's all great. I mean, they already do background checks for guns, with a handgun or whatever firearm you're going to purchase. So
actually, they is only licensed gun dealers. I don't know if you caught this story, but this happened this week in Texas. The local NBC News reporter Meredith Yeomans writes that a 27-year-old, this is from a report by Hunter over at Daily Kos, 27-year-old Fort Worth man, according to his father who called the police, was planning to execute a mass shooting in the style of the Odessa attack. He was going to go out and kill a bunch of Hispanics. He withdrew hundreds of dollars from his account. He began making the rounds of the local gun stores, but he couldn't pass the background checks, so the stores couldn't sell to him. At that point, his dad called the police. But as the police were trying to get this kid, he goes to one of these unlicensed gun dealers, these gun show things, and they're about to sell him the weapons when the police swoop in on it. So there's still a place where mass shooters can easily buy weapons, and that's the gun show loophole, and that needs to be closed.
The gun show loophole's been talked about a lot, but that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is as far as people having issues with getting insurance, I completely support that issue for getting insurance. I have insurance for my firearms, and I have much respect for...
Andre, what company writes the policy?
USCCA.
Interesting. I just don't know who's offering gun insurance. USCCA. I'll have to check it out.
Plenty of people. There's a couple of companies that I know personally that I have one, and many of the gun owners that I have, they have insurance on their firearms.
Sure. So what's the point that you want to make, Andre? We're going to hit a break in just a second here. What's the point you were trying to make?
Well, I just think that if you're going to talk about the gun control issue, then we have to insert the local law enforcement in that argument, because the amount of shootings, the amount of killings that comes from them, they have to be regulated too.
Oh, I'm with you on that. America had something, several, it was between 500 and 700, I think, police shootings last year. And then you look at other countries, even if you aggregate all their populations to be the same as ours, you're looking at like Germany had one, the United Kingdom had none. I mean, we've got a serious problem in this country. Andre, thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Coming up on 48 minutes past the hour is the Thom Hartmann Program, talk media for the sane among us, the place where smart people get their news. And welcome back. Cheryl in Teaneck, New Jersey. Hey, Cheryl. Thanks for watching us on your Roku device. What's up?
Hey, Tom. I wanted to let you know I was voted onto the precincts committee because of you. I'm an African American, and when you said that, I actually ran and got voted on.
Good on you, Cheryl. Congratulations. That's wonderful.
Last night I co-sponsored a measure, a resolution about the genocide happening now in India and Kashmir. And I wanted to see, why is there a media blackout except for Democracy Now! On this issue? On Friday, my governor, Phil Murphy, will be going into India to discuss job opportunities. And we're on course to have the worst genocide in planetary history.
In Kashmir? I mean, I know that the Indian government basically locked it down, shut down all communications, but I didn't know that it had gone to the point where they were killing people.
Last night we had someone testify before our committee. Today is day 30. Last night was day 34. 90,000, between 70 and 90,000 people have been murdered. Christians and Jews, all minorities. Not Jews, I'm sorry, Christians and Muslims, all minorities.
Wow. Where can I learn more about that, Cheryl? I have not seen that story.
A lot of it I actually got from Democracy Now! That's where I was alerted. Right. I'd be happy to send over our resolution. We also have copies of articles from the New York Times, Amnesty International, The Intercept. It is documented.
I'll see what I can do to track it down this afternoon. This sounds like something that we really should profile more vigorously on our program. Cheryl, I got to run, but thank you for the call, and thanks, and wow, congratulations on getting on your local Democratic Party.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great talking with you. Tim in Mattawan, Michigan. Hey, Tim, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Listen,
Sure.
I have one question, and that's what did Snyder do with the $8.5 million that us taxpayers paid for his defense fund when he wasn't even charged?
Oh, I have no idea. I didn't know that existed.
I'm not even sure about the amount.
So.
I just heard that once.
Yeah. So the state, I can't answer the question, Tim. I don't know the details, but you're suggesting that the state of Michigan had a fund to defend Rick Snyder against what charges that he helped poison people in Flint?
And they didn't make it clear how of course the Republican legislature back then didn't make it clear how they collected that money, but I suspect that it came in on they had one election in 2015 where they added this one sentence to a bill for road repair that was a standard thing that was renewed every 3 years.
Right.
And it just said it's going to go to a bunch of lawyers, and it didn't say how much or what for. And people voted it in. I voted against it.
Remarkable. Huh. Tim,
That was Van Buren County.
Yeah, okay, I'll check that out. In fact, I'm going to see one of my brothers in a few months, and I'll ask him about that too. Tim, thanks a lot for the call. I mean, he still lives in Michigan. In fact, he lives up near Grand Rapids. Anyhow, we'll be back. It's 51 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video. Welcome back. Pardon me. Let's see here. Dean in Pomona, Kansas. Hey, Dean, what's on your mind today? Whoa. Dean, we have an echo. I'm going to put you on hold, and hopefully Joyce can figure out what's going on with that. That was strange. Randy in Sacramento. Randy, let's try this. What's up?
Okay, so thank you for taking my call. This is the first time I ever called your show.
Well, thank you.
So I wanted to talk to you about what's going on with our single payer system and healthcare for all in California. And what's happening is that we had a bill. We've actually had two bills go to the legislature and get vetoed by the governor. So what's happening also in California is we're going to have some kind of clean money. I think that's our plan, because every time people talk about getting anything, we have companies and organizations who are paying the legislature not to do their job.
Right.
And so I believe, so what I belong to is CaliforniaCleanMoney.org, CACleanMoney.org. And we're trying to put truth in advertising into what's happening, because people don't understand where the money's coming from and all the dark money that's coming from. And plus, we also work on making text messaging more clear. We make social media to tell you where the social media is coming from. So, what do you think about that?
I think it's great. California Clean Money sounds like a plan, Randy, and good luck. Keep at it. Paul in Beatsville, Alabama. Hey, Paul, what's up?
I understand gun violence is at an all-time high, but nobody's
just
willing
in the United States.
Take it back to the root cause of the deterioration of the family unit. No leadership in the home, fatherless children, the proliferation of no value of life whatsoever. I never hear anybody want to talk about that. They want to go and treat the symptom and not the problem.
Okay, I get it that you think that that's the cause, Paul. I have a question for you, if you don't mind.
Go.
In most European countries, Western European countries, Germany, France, the UK, Italy, Belgium, Holland, the Netherlands, the divorce rate is actually higher than in the United States. In Canada, it's about the same as the United States. The abortion rate is higher in those European countries than the United States. I don't know about Canada.
Nobody said anything. I didn't say anything about abortion.
No, I know, but you said respect for life. So, but in any case, all those social ills, what you're defining as social ills that you think are leading to mass shootings, are actually present in all these other countries, and in fact are even more present in those countries than here in the United States. And yet in the United States, 40,000 people last year died from gun violence. And in the United Kingdom, France, Germany combined, it was probably 5 or 6 people. Well, I don't know the numbers for Canada, but I'd be surprised if it was more than a few hundred for the entire country. We had 40,000. How is that?
You go back to 1950 across all demographic lines and look at our social ills. They were extremely low because by far most, the family was intact.
Yeah, but
there was moral leadership.
Okay, I think we're talking past each other. Paul, thank you for the call. We'll have to live to battle another day. Thanks so much for being with us, and don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you, all of us, right? Get out there, get active. Follow, I think it was Cheryl, follow her example. Is show up at your local Democratic Party and say, I want to be a precinct committee person. Anyhow, get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.